It began with a man who never raised his voice, and yet he would command more soldiers in battle than any American general in history, more than 1,000,000 lives moving at the edge of his decisions. But on one quiet morning in June of 1944, standing far from the chaos of the beaches, he faced a choice that would never leave him: continue the landings or call them off and watch everything collapse. He did not shout, he did not panic, he simply thought, while thousands of men were already dying. Tonight, we return to that kind of man, not the loud ones history often remembers, not the generals of spectacle and fire, but the quiet ones who carry the weight in silence. Before the maps, before the armies, before the war, there was only a boy born into a storm. February 12, 1893. A blizzard tears across the small town of Clark, Missouri. Snow presses against the windows of a wooden farmhouse, the wind howling through the night like something alive. Inside, a woman struggles through labor while her husband paces the narrow kitchen floor, counting breaths he cannot control. The world outside is frozen. The world inside is about to change forever. Just after midnight, the child is born, a boy. They name him Omar. No one in that moment could possibly understand what had just entered the world. Not the midwife wrapping him in corpse, not the father staring down in quiet relief, not the sleeping town buried beneath snow, because this child born into cold and obscurity will one day stand at the center of the largest war humanity has ever known. But for now, survival is enough. The fire must not go out. The storm must be endured. Morning must come. And in that small, fragile beginning, something is already forming. Not ambition, not glory, but something quieter: responsibility. Omar Bradley grows up in a world where nothing comes easily. There is no wolf waiting for him, no influence to guide his path, no guarantee of anything beyond the next winter. His father earns barely enough to keep food on the table. His mother stretches every dollar until it feels like it might break. The house is small, the future is smaller. And when Omar is just 13 years old, that fragile balance shatters. His father dies suddenly, leaving behind debts, silence, and a boy who now understands something most never truly learn. The world does not pause for your suffering. It does not slow down. It does not care. You either adapt or you disappear. And so, he adapts. He works long hours in heat and smoke, his hands learning the rhythm of steel and labor before they ever hold command. He studies at night, not because it is easy but because it is necessary. There is no dramatic turning point, no moment of sudden transformation, just quiet endurance repeated again and again until it becomes who he is. Years later, when he arrives at West Point, he does not look like the others. They come with confidence, with money, with names that carry weight. He arrives with 2 shirts, 1 pair of shoes, and a determination that does not need to be seen to exist. He does not stand out, he does not try to, but sometimes the most dangerous thing to underestimate is the man who never needed attention in the first place. Among those cadets is another young man, loud, confident, impossible to ignore, Dwight Eisenhower. Where one speaks, the other listens. Where one pushes, the other calculates. Different in every visible way, and yet both are quietly moving toward a future neither of them can yet see, a future shaped by fire. Because far across the ocean the world is already beginning to break. Europe is siding toward war, armies are forming, lines are being drawn, and soon everything will change. But when that war finally comes, Bradley will not be there. He will train others, prepare them, send them forward, and stay behind. A soldier who has never seen battle, a commander without war. It will haunt him, not loudly, not visibly, but somewhere beneath the surface a question will begin to form. What happens when the moment finally comes? When preparation ends and reality begins? When the maps are no longer lines but lives? Tonight we follow that question, through the quiet years, through the forgotten decades, through the slow, relentless shaping of a man who never asked for greatness, but would one day be forced to carry it. So settle in, let the noise of the day fall away, and step slowly into the past, where history does not rush, where decisions are made in silence, and where one quiet man will learn what it truly means to command. It began with a man who never raised his voice to command a room. Omar Bradley did not stride through headquarters with thunder in his step or fire in his eyes. He did not crave spectacle, nor did he seek the spotlight that war has a habit of shining on those loud enough to chase it. Bradley moved quietly, with thought, with patience, with a kind of steadiness that does not draw applause, but earns trust. He grew up far from the noise of battlefields, in towns where mornings came slowly and the days moved with the rhythm of work and humility. Those early years shaped him more than any uniform ever could. He learned to listen before speaking, to consider before deciding, to understand before acting. And yet, when the world tore itself open in the 1940s, it was this quiet man whom history placed at the center of one of the largest armies ever assembled. Bradley did not seem like a man destined for war. He seemed like a man destined for responsibility. But responsibility, in wartime, is heavier than armor. It is sharper than shrapnel. It lingers in every order, every casualty list, every mile gained or lost. When Bradley arrived in Europe, the Allies were preparing for the impossible, the liberation of an entire continent held under occupation. Plans sprawled across tables like tangled maps of fate. Weather reports changed by the hour. Generals debated visions of strategy. Soldiers trained beneath darkening skies, waiting for someone to tell them when the storm of history would finally break. And, in the middle of that storm, Bradley stood calm. He studied the beaches of Normandy, not as symbols, but as responsibilities. Each sector, each landing craft, each tide pattern, each unit assignment. He knew that success would depend not on bluster, but on coordination. Not on noise, but on precision. Not on ego, but on understanding the human cost behind every line of the plan. When the landings began, chaos spread across the water like a shiver. Boats drifted off course. Waves swallowed gear. Smoke blurred the horizon. Men sprinted, stumbled, crawled across sand turned into a graveyard of broken steel. Bradley watched, heart heavy, mind working through every outcome. He made adjustments, quietly shifting units, recalculating positions, rethinking objectives. His voice remained steady even as the battle screamed around him. After Normandy, the war moved inward into the hedgerows that wrapped the countryside in a labyrinth of green walls and hidden dangers. Each field became a puzzle. Each ditch became a trap. The enemy moved like shadows beneath thick leaves, and every advance felt like stepping into uncertainty. Soldiers grew tired. Commanders grew frustrated, but Bradley kept pushing forward, not with fury, but with patience. His leadership was a kind of gentleness, shaped into steel. As the Allies broke out of Normandy, Bradley commanded armies so vast that the map of Europe seemed barely large enough to contain them. The weight of every decision pressed on his shoulders. He dealt with clashing personalities, conflicting strategies, and the tension between what was possible and what was necessary. Through all of it, he remained a steadying force, unshaken, deliberate, human. During the Battle of the Bulge, winter poured across the Ardennes like a curse, snow piling in drifts, forests crackling beneath ice, roads buried beneath storms. The German offensive surged forward with terrifying speed. Units were overrun, towns fell, supplies vanished. The front threatened to collapse, but Bradley responded the way he always did, not with drama, but with clarity. He reorganized defenses, redirected armies, strengthened critical points, focused on what could be saved, not what had already been lost. And slowly, mile by mile, the chaos softened. The line stabilized. The tide shifted again. By the time the Allies crossed into Germany, Bradley's leadership had become the quiet heartbeat of the Western Front, constant, reliable, unwavering. He did not seek glory, he sought direction, and it was enough to guide millions. Tonight, we return to that steadiness, to the soft-spoken general who carried the war not through fire and spectacle, but through thought and compassion, to the decisions made in quiet rooms lit by dim lamps, to the weight of maps and memories pressed beneath his hands, to the burden he carried for every soldier who followed him into a future none of them could predict. Before we drift deeper into his story, I want to ask you something gentle, something personal. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what hour has settled around you? Is the night soft where you are? Still, warm, quiet, and something deeper unique to this episode. Bradley's strength came from his ability to stay calm when everything around him demanded panic. In your own life, Has there been a moment when you found calm in the middle of a storm, even briefly? And if these slow, gentle journeys into the past help you ease your mind, soften your breath, or drift towards sleep, consider subscribing. February 12, 1893. A blizzard tears through Clark, Missouri. Population 372. In a wooden farmhouse at the edge of town, a woman screams through labor, while her husband paces in the kitchen, watching snow pile against the windows. The baby arrives just after midnight, a boy they name Omar Bradley. Outside, the temperature drops to 15 below zero. The midwife wraps the infant in quilts and tells the father his son is strong, that he'll survive this terrible night. She has no idea she's just delivered a child who will one day command more troops in combat than any American general in history. No idea that this freezing, forgettable town will produce the man who leads 1,300,000 soldiers across Europe. But on this night, survival is miracle enough. Clark, Missouri isn't the kind of place that produces generals. It's barely the kind of place that stays on maps. By 1910, the town has shrunk to fewer than 200 souls, its post office closed, its railway depot abandoned. The Bradley family lives on the desperate edge of rural poverty. Omar's father, John Smith Bradley, teaches in a one-room schoolhouse for $40 a month. His mother, Sarah Elizabeth Hubbard, takes in sewing and sells eggs to neighbors. They own nothing but debts and dignity. When Omar is 13 years old, his father dies suddenly of pneumonia, leaving the family destitute. The boy watches his mother weep over unpaid bills and wonders how they'll survive the winter. He learns something fundamental in that moment, that the world is indifferent to your suffering, that you either adapt or perish. It's a lesson he'll carry into the bloodiest war in human history. Omar Bradley escapes poverty through baseball and mathematics. He's gifted at both, though neither comes easily. At Mobley High School, he plays shortstop with mechanical precision, calculating angles and trajectories like a surveyor. His batting average hovers around 300, good enough to dream about professional leagues. But dreams cost money, and Bradley has none. Instead, he takes a job at the Wabash Railroad as a boilermaker, earning 15 cents an hour to feed his mother and younger siblings. He works 12-hour shifts in 100-degree heat, riveting steel plates while coal smoke fills his lungs. The other workers are grown men with families, criminals on the run, drifters with nothing to lose. Bradley is 17 years old. He learns to keep his mouth shut, do his work, and never complain. When his shift ends, he studies mathematics by lamplight, preparing for the entrance exam that might change everything. The West Point appointment arrives in 1911 like a telegram from another universe. Bradley has never been more than 50 miles from Moberly. He's never seen an ocean, never stayed in a hotel, never eaten in a restaurant with tablecloths. The train to New York takes 3 days, and he spends the entire journey staring out the window, watching America expand beyond anything he imagined. At West Point, he's surrounded by boys from wealthy families, senators' sons who arrived with steamer trunks and servants. Bradley owns 2 shirts and 1 pair of shoes. His roommate is Dwight David Eisenhower, a cocky kid from Kansas who talks too much and breaks every rule. They couldn't be more different. Ike is charismatic and rebellious. Bradley is quiet and methodical. But they both understand what it means to be poor in a rich man's world. They both know that West Point is their only ticket out. June 12, 1915. Graduation day at West Point. The class of 1915 stands in formation on the parade ground, 164 young men about to receive their commissions as second lieutenants. The newspapers will later call them the class the stars fell on, because 59 members will become generals, an unprecedented percentage that speaks to both the quality of the class and the catastrophic wars they'll fight. Bradley finishes 44th in class rank, solidly middle of the pack. He's not brilliant like some cadets, not charismatic like Eisenhower, not naturally gifted like James Van Fleet or Joseph McNarney. He's just competent, reliable, thorough. The adjectives follow him like shadows. Steady, careful, methodical. No one remembers him as exceptional. Years later, when asked about Cadet Bradley, classmates will struggle to recall any distinguishing features. He was there, they'll say. He did his work. He played baseball well. Beyond that, nothing. But Bradley graduates into a world about to tear itself apart. In Europe, the Great War has been raging for 11 months. France and Germany are bleeding each other white in trenches that stretch from Switzerland to the English Channel. Britain has committed its entire professional army and watched it die in Flanders mud. The United States remains neutral, but everyone knows neutrality is temporary. Bradley receives orders to the 14th Infantry Regiment at Fort Douglas, Washington. He packs his belongings, still just 2 shirts and 1 pair of shoes, and takes a train west. In Washington, he meets Mary Elizabeth Quayle at a community dance in Moberly during Christmas leave. She's a school teacher, daughter of a railroad worker, as poor as he is. They marry in December 1916 in a ceremony that costs $11. 4 months later, America declares war on Germany. Bradley spends World War I guarding copper mines in Montana. He requests combat assignment 17 times between April 1917 and November 1918. Every request is denied. The Army needs experienced officers to train the flood of recruits pouring into hastily built camps across America. Bradley is good at training, patient, methodical, able to break complex tasks into manageable steps. He transforms farm boys and factory workers into soldiers, then watches them shipped to France while he remains stateside. At Butte, Montana, he commands troops guarding mines against labor unrest and potential sabotage. It's important work, he's told. Essential to the war effort, but it's not combat. His classmates are winning Distinguished Service Crosses in Belleau Wood and the Argonne Forest. Eisenhower is training tank crews in Pennsylvania, also stuck stateside, also furious about missing the war. Both men will spend the rest of their lives wondering how missing World War I shaped their approach to World War II. The armistice comes on November 11, 1918. Bradley is 25 years old, a first lieutenant, and has never heard a shot fired in anger. The realization haunts him that he's a professional soldier who's never experienced the thing he was trained to do. In Montana, he reads after-action reports from France, studying how attacks unfolded, how artillery barrages were coordinated, how infantry advanced through machine gun fire. He's horrified by the casualty figures: 26,000 Americans killed in 6 weeks during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, more than the entire United States Army before the war. The numbers are abstract, academic. Bradley can't imagine what 26,000 dead men looks like. He won't have to imagine for much longer. The interwar years will test Bradley in ways combat never could. He'll spend 23 years between the wars, slowly climbing from lieutenant to lieutenant colonel, while watching his country forget everything it learned at such terrible cost. He'll see the army shrink to 174,000 men, smaller than Portugal's army, smaller than Romania's. He'll watch Congress/military budgets, while veterans sleep in shanties and beg for their promised bonuses. He'll teach tactics at West Point to cadets, who will one day serve under his command in Europe, never knowing that the quiet major drilling them in infantry maneuvers will become the most powerful American field commander of the next war. The interwar years are a kind of purgatory, too long for ambition, too short for forgetting. Bradley endures them the only way he knows how. One day at a time, one task at a time, waiting for history to need him again. But in February 1893, as a blizzard buries Clark, Missouri, none of this has happened yet. A baby cries in a farmhouse, while his father prays the fire doesn't go out. The midwife packs her bag and trudges home through snow that reaches her knees. The town sleeps through the storm, unaware that it has just produced the man who will command the largest American army ever assembled in combat. Unaware that this infant, born into poverty and obscurity, will one day stand on Omaha Beach and decide whether to evacuate or commit more troops to a slaughter. Unaware that the quiet boy who survives this terrible night will grow into the quiet man who orders 500,000 men into battle. The blizzard howls, the baby sleeps, and somewhere in the distance, 20 years away, Europe begins the long march toward catastrophe. December 1929, the stock market has collapsed, taking Bradley's modest savings with it. He's been a captain for 11 years, the same rank he received in 1918, frozen there by peacetime stagnation and a promotion system designed for an army that no longer grows. His salary is $200 per month, just cut by 15% under congressional budget restrictions. He has a wife, a daughter born in 1924, and approximately $32 in the bank. At Fort Benning, Georgia, where he's assigned to the infantry school, officers' families share houses to split rent costs. Bradley and Mary live in half a duplex with another captain's family, separated by walls so thin they can hear their neighbors argue about money every night. This is what victory looks like, 11 years after the war, to end all wars, surviving on depression wages, while the country pretends soldiers don't exist. But Fort Benning, in the late 1920s, is the most intellectually vibrant military institution in America, and Bradley has arrived at exactly the right moment. The commandant is Colonel George Caplet Marshall, a driven, intense officer who believes the Army's failure in World War I wasn't tactical but educational. Marshall inherited an infantry school teaching outdated French doctrine from 1917, using training manuals that still referenced cavalry charges and bayonet assaults as primary infantry tactics. He's systematically burning it all down. Marshall fires instructors who can't adapt, rewrites every manual, and institutes a teaching philosophy radical for its time: encourage initiative, punish indecisiveness, reward unconventional thinking. Students are thrown into tactical problems with incomplete information and told to make decisions quickly. Wrong decisions executed decisively are better than right decisions arrived at too late. Bradley absorbs this like catechism. The infantry school classes are small, intense, and contain an astonishing concentration of future World War II leadership. Bradley sits in classes with Joseph Stilwell, who will command in China, with Matthew Ridgway, who will jump into Normandy with the 82nd Airborne, with J. Lawton Collins, who will command the 7th Corps across Europe. Marshall is building a network, identifying officers who can think rather than just obey. He keeps a little black book with names and assessment notes who can handle pressure, who freezes under scrutiny, who blames others for mistakes. Bradley's name goes in the book with a simple notation: quiet, self-effacing, capable of handling big things. The assessment is accurate but incomplete. Marshall hasn't yet seen what Bradley does when big things involve watching thousands of men die on a beach. The 1930s are a slow-motion catastrophe for military readiness. Bradley spends 1934 through 1938 at West Point, teaching tactics to cadets who will become his junior officers in Europe. The job pays the same salary, still $200 per month, still barely enough to survive. The Army has shrunk to 139,000 men by 1933, ranking 17th in the world by size, behind Belgium and just ahead of Greece. Equipment is World War I's surplus, literally rotting in warehouses. The Springfield model of 1903 is still the standard infantry rifle, a bolt-action weapon that holds 5 rounds and requires manual reloading between shots. Machine guns are water-cooled Brownings from 1917, so heavy it takes 4 men to move one. Tanks don't exist in meaningful numbers. The entire United States Army possesses fewer than 400 tanks in 1939, most of them experimental models that break down constantly. At West Point, Bradley drills cadets in tactics that will be obsolete before they ever command troops in combat. How to advance infantry in extended lines under covering artillery fire. How to dig trenches and string barbed wire. How to coordinate cavalry reconnaissance with infantry assaults. The cadets memorize these lessons dutifully, never suspecting they're learning to fight the last war. Bradley knows it's outdated. He's studied German doctrine, read about their experiments with tank warfare and combined arms maneuvers. But the Army has no money for new equipment, no political support for modernization, and no vision for what the next war might look like. So Bradley teaches what he's ordered to teach, and hopes somehow these young men will be ready when the killing starts again. Some of them will be ready, most will learn through failures that cost hundreds of lives. June 1940, France collapses in 6 weeks, stunning the world and terrifying America. The German blitzkrieg tears through supposedly impregnable French defenses with a speed and violence that makes World War I look like a chess match. Bradley is at Fort Benning again, now a lieutenant colonel, after finally escaping the rank of captain in 1936. He watches newsreels of German tanks racing across France and realizes everything he taught at West Point is obsolete. The Army he spent 25 years serving is obsolete. The tactics, the equipment, the doctrine, all of it designed for a war that no longer exists. Congress suddenly remembers it, has a military, and begins appropriating billions for expansion. The first peacetime draft in American history begins in September 1940. The Army that numbered 189,000 in June will balloon to 1,400,000 by June 1941. Bradley will be asked to transform civilians into soldiers in months, using equipment that doesn't exist and tactics that haven't been written yet. February 1941, Bradley pins on his first star, becoming a brigadier general after 26 years as a commissioned officer. The promotion is dizzying. He leapfrogged from lieutenant colonel to brigadier general in just over a year, skipping the rank of colonel entirely. George Marshall, now Army Chief of Staff, is systematically promoting officers he trusts over hundreds of more senior officers, whose only qualification is longevity. It's a ruthless meritocracy that destroys careers and saves lives. Bradley is given command of the 82nd Infantry Division at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, 15,000 men, most drafted within the last 6 months, none with any military experience. His job is to turn them into a combat division in less than a year. He has no idea how, none of them do. The entire army is winging it, making up doctrine in real time, hoping they'll figure it out before having to fight. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns, and America is finally, officially at war. Bradley is 48 years old, a one-star general commanding a training division in Louisiana. He requests combat assignment immediately. He will not be fooled twice, will not spend another war stateside while his classmates win glory overseas. But the request sits unanswered for months. The army needs Bradley right where he is, turning civilians into soldiers, because the flood of recruits has become a tsunami. By the end of December, the army will receive 1,200,000 new soldiers. They need training camps, instructors, equipment, doctrine. Bradley is too valuable as a trainer to be spared for combat. Once again, he's stuck teaching while others fight. But this time, the wait won't last as long. The phone call comes in February 1943. Bradley is now a major general, commanding the 28th Infantry Division, still in the United States, still training troops. Eisenhower is on the line from North Africa, voice crackling through a terrible connection. The American army has just been mauled at Kasserine Pass, the first major engagement between American-German forces, and it's been a disaster. 3,000 Americans captured, equipment abandoned, whole units routed in panic. Eisenhower needs someone to take over the Second Corps, restore discipline, and salvage American credibility. He needs someone who won't panic, won't make excuses, and won't get soldiers killed through stupid decisions. He needs Bradley. The orders come through in 24 hours. Bradley has 1 week to close out his command, brief his replacement, and fly to Tunisia. After 28 years in the army, 25 years after World War I ended, Omar Bradley is finally going to war. But in December 1929, standing in his half-a duplex at Fort Benning with $32 in the bank, Bradley has no idea any of this is coming. He's a captain in an army nobody wants, serving a country that's trying to forget war exists. His classmates from West Point are scattered across tiny outposts, teaching ROTC at state universities, guarding the Mexican border, slowly giving up on the careers they imagined. Some will resign and take jobs selling insurance or teaching high school. Some will endure and become the generals who win World War II. Bradley endures because he doesn't know how to do anything else, because his mother raised him to finish what he starts. And he started this path when he was 17 years old, riveting steel in a railroad shop, dreaming of escape. The Depression will end, the forgotten decades will end, and when they do, the army will need men who endured, who learned, who prepared for a war they couldn't imagine. Bradley is one of those men. History just hasn't noticed him yet. February 24th, 1943. The C-47 transport lurches through North African turbulence, and Omar Bradley grips his seat, fighting air sickness and dread in equal measure. Below, the Atlas Mountains give way to Tunisian desert, where the American army has just suffered its first major defeat of World War II. Bradley is flying toward Kasserine Pass, where 5 days ago, German tanks tore through American positions like paper, killing 300, wounding 3,000, capturing another 3,000 in a single afternoon of mechanized violence. He's never commanded troops in combat, never heard artillery fired in anger, never seen what a tank shell does to a human body. In 6 hours, he'll assume command of the Second Corps, 90,000 men spread across southern Tunisia, demoralized and defeated, wondering if Americans can actually fight Germans and win. The turbulence worsens. Bradley closes his eyes and remembers what Eisenhower told him in Algiers. I need you to restore American credibility. I need you to prove we belong on this battlefield. The American disaster at Kasserine Pass isn't just a tactical defeat, it's an existential crisis of confidence. For 15 months, America has been at war, mobilizing its industrial might, drafting millions of men, and promising the world it will be democracy's arsenal. Then, in one afternoon, German forces under Erwin Rommel smashed through American lines with humiliating ease. American infantry flee in panic, abandoning equipment, throwing away rifles. Officers lose contact with their units. Communications break down completely. Rommel's assessment is withering. The Americans are still green and inexperienced. The British are less diplomatic. One British general observes American troops at Kasserine and remarks they fight like a troop of Boy Scouts. The insult will echo for months, fueling American determination to prove themselves or die trying. Bradley's job is to make sure they do the former. Eisenhower's selection of Bradley is surprising to everyone except Eisenhower. There are 366 general officers, senior to Bradley, men who've commanded divisions in peacetime, who've studied at the War College, who've spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. Eisenhower passes over all of them and picks a quiet two-star general who's never commanded anything in combat. The decision outrages the past Ivy generals, but makes perfect sense to anyone who understands Eisenhower's logic. He doesn't need a brilliant tactician or a charismatic leader. He needs someone who won't make the situation worse. Someone methodical, calm, under pressure, capable of restoring basic military discipline to an army that's forgotten how to function. Bradley is that man, not because he's exceptional, but because he's exactly what this moment requires. Competence over brilliance. Process over inspiration. March 6, 1943. Bradley's first meeting with George Patton takes place in a dusty command post near El Gheta, Tunisia. Patton commands the 1st Armored Corps, technically equal in rank to Bradley but vastly more experienced, having led troops in Mexico and France during World War I. He's also flamboyant, profane, and theatrical, everything Bradley is not. Patton wears custom-tailored uniforms with polished cavalry boots and ivory-handled revolvers. Bradley wears standard-issue everything and looks like a middle-aged accountant who accidentally wandered into a war. The contrast is so stark that soldiers joke about it. Patton is all blood and guts. Bradley is the guy who files the paperwork afterward. But in this first meeting, something complex begins. Patton respects Bradley's quiet competence. Bradley admires Patton's aggressive instincts. Neither man fully trusts the other, but both recognize they need each other. It's the beginning of the most productive and most toxic command relationship of the war. The American offensive begins on March 17th at El Gheta. Bradley coordinates the attack with Patton, combining 1st Armored Corps and 2nd Corps into a hammer blow against German positions. The assault opens with artillery barrages that shake the desert, 300 guns firing for 45 minutes, dropping 6,000 rounds on German trenches. American infantry advance behind the barrage, and for the first time since landing in North Africa, they fight with discipline and coordination. The German counterattack comes at dawn on March 23rd. Italian Centauro division supported by German tanks, trying to break through American lines. Bradley's artillery captures them in the open. For 3 hours, American guns pour high-explosive shells into advancing Italian formations. By noon, Centauro division has ceased to exist as a combat unit. Bradley watches through binoculars and thinks, so this is what modern artillery does to human beings. The victory at El Gheta restores American confidence, but exposes deeper problems. The troops fought well when properly led and supported, but properly led remains inconsistent across the 2nd Corps. Some battalion commanders are competent, others are disastrously bad. Bradley begins relieving officers with surgical precision, a battalion commander here, a regimental commander there. He doesn't make speeches or explain his decisions. Men simply disappear, replaced by others who've proven themselves under fire. The purge is ruthless and necessary. By mid-April, Bradley has relieved or reassigned 20% of his senior officers. The survivors understand the new rules: perform or leave. There are no second chances, no excuses, no protection for failure. It's a leadership philosophy Bradley will maintain throughout the war: quiet, methodical, unforgiving. April 7th, 1943, Hill 609, Tunisia. The 34th Infantry Division attacks a rocky prominence that dominates the surrounding terrain. The hill is held by German paratroopers, elite troops who've been ordered to hold at all costs. The battle becomes a close-quarters nightmare of grenades and bayonets, fought across 50 yards of rocks and scrub-brush. It lasts 4 days and costs the 34th Division 47% casualties. Companies that started with 150 men finish with 80. Bradley watches casualty reports accumulate and realizes this is what infantry combat actually is, not the sweeping maneuvers shown on maps, but brutal, grinding attrition measured in yards. Hill 609 is worth perhaps 200 yards of tactical advantage. It costs 1,900 American casualties. Bradley approves the attack, commits the reserves, and watches young men die for terrain that will be forgotten within weeks. The North African campaign ends in May 1943 with the surrender of 250,000 German and Italian troops. It's a strategic victory that opens the Mediterranean and proves Americans can fight, but Bradley takes no satisfaction from it. He's learned too much about what victory actually costs. He's seen what artillery does to men caught in the open, how high explosive shells don't just kill but erase, leaving nothing identifiable. He's signed letters to parents explaining how their sons died heroically when the truth is they died confused and terrified, and calling for mothers who couldn't hear them. He's promoted men to replace officers killed by sniper fire, knowing the replacements will likely die within weeks. This is what command means: sending men to die, writing reports that sanitize the horror, and sleeping alone with the knowledge that tomorrow you'll do it again. July 10, 1943, the invasion fleet for Sicily assembles off Malta, 2,600 ships carrying 160,000 troops, for the largest amphibious operation since Gallipoli in World War I. Bradley commands the American component's 2nd Corps, now expanded to include the 1st, 3rd, 45th, and 9th Infantry Divisions, plus the 2nd Armored. He's subordinate to Patton, who commands 7th Army for this operation. The reversal of their Tunisia roles is awkward but workable. Patton is being promised that after Sicily, he'll command an army in the invasion of France. Bradley has been promised nothing, but Eisenhower has hinted there might be bigger things ahead. For now, Bradley focuses on what he controls, getting 90,000 men across 70 miles of Mediterranean without losing half of them to German air attacks or simple navigation errors. The fleet sails at dusk, and Bradley stands on deck watching ships stretch to the horizon. Somewhere in that armada are young men who'll be dead in 48 hours. He doesn't know which ones yet. July 10, 1943, 0300 hours. The invasion beaches at Gela, Sicily, erupt in chaos that will haunt Bradley for the rest of his life. American paratroopers, scattered across 50 miles of Sicilian countryside, during their nighttime drop, fight isolated battles against German patrols. Landing craft hit sandbars 400 yards from shore, forcing infantry to wade through chest-deep water, while machine guns rake the beaches. One company of the 1st Infantry Division Veterans of North Africa loses 60 men in the first 10 minutes. Bradley watches from the command ship, receiving fragmentary reports that contradict each other. One message claims the beach is secure, the next reports heavy resistance and requests immediate reinforcement. At 0530, German tanks appear on the coastal road above Gela. For 30 minutes, the invasion teeters on collapse. American infantry pinned on beaches, with no anti-tank weapons heavy enough to stop the panzers. Then destroyers risk grounding themselves to provide point-blank fire support. 5-inch naval guns firing at 900 yards destroy 11 German tanks in 15 minutes. The beachhead holds barely. The friendly fire incident that follows becomes one of the war's worst-kept secrets and most devastating failures of coordination. On the night of July 11th, American C-47 transports carrying reinforcements for the 82nd Airborne fly over the invasion fleet. Navy commanders have been notified of the flight path. Anti-aircraft gun crews have been ordered to hold fire, but when the first transports appear, a single nervous gunner opens fire. Within seconds, every ship in the fleet is shooting at American aircraft. 23 planes are shot down. 229 American paratroopers die, killed by American guns firing American ammunition. Bradley learns of the massacre at dawn and feels physically sick. He orders an immediate investigation, demands accountability, and receives none. The Navy blames the Army for poor coordination. The Army blames the Navy for trigger-happy gunners. Nobody takes responsibility, and 229 families receive telegrams explaining their sons died in action. Technically true, grotesquely incomplete. Sicily becomes a race between Patton and British General Bernard Montgomery, and Bradley watches it with growing unease. The strategic objective is Messina, the northeastern port that controls the strait between Sicily and mainland Italy. Montgomery's 8th Army advances up the east coast. Patton's 7th Army drives through the center and west. On paper, they're cooperating. In practice, they're competing, and the competition is costing lives. Patton becomes obsessed with reaching Messina before Montgomery, throwing divisions into frontal assaults against prepared German positions because going round would take too long. Bradley's 2nd Corps bears the brunt of this, impatience attacking through mountainous terrain against Davian German paratroopers who've turned every village into a fortress. The casualty reports pile up: 800 on July 25th, 900 on July 27th, 1,000 on July 30th. Bradley begins to understand that Patton's brilliance and Patton's recklessness are inseparable. two sides of the same temperament. August 1st, 1943. Near the town of Troina, nestled in Sicily's central mountains, the 1st Infantry Division launches an attack that becomes a microcosm of everything wrong with the campaign. Troina sits on a rocky ridge, defended by German 15th Panzer Grenadier Division. The terrain offers no room for maneuver, just frontal assault up exposed slopes. Bradley approves the attack because he has no alternative. Going round Troina means a 50-mile detour that Patton won't authorize. The assault begins at dawn, with an artillery barrage that sounds impressive and accomplishes nothing. The Germans are dug into caves and reinforced bunkers where high explosive shells can't reach them. American infantry advance uphill into machine gun fire, gaining ground measured in yards. The battle lasts 6 days. The 1st Division loses 517 killed, 2,000 wounded. When Troina finally falls on August 6th, the Germans withdraw in good order to the next ridge, and the process starts again. The pattern repeats across Sicily. Americans attack fortified positions, suffer heavy casualties, force German withdrawal, and watch the Germans escape to fight again. By mid-August, Bradley realizes they're not winning, they're just making the Germans retreat on schedule. The German evacuation from Sicily is a masterpiece of military planning. 40,000 German troops, 10,000 vehicles, and countless tons of supplies ferry across the Strait of Messina to mainland Italy over 6 nights. Allied air power and naval supremacy, supposedly war-winning advantages, fail to stop or even significantly disrupt the evacuation. Bradley watches German convoys cross the strait through binoculars and feels the frustration of tactical victories that mean nothing strategically. They've conquered Sicily but allowed the enemy army to escape intact. It's a lesson about the limits of firepower and the importance of cutting escape routes. He'll apply that lesson in France with devastating effectiveness. August 17th, 1943, 0900 hours. Patton enters Messina 3 hours before Montgomery, technically winning that undeclared race. Photographers capture Patton posing in front of welcome signs, grinning like he's won the war. Bradley is not in the photographs. He's at 2nd Corps headquarters, reviewing casualty figures: 7,300 killed, wounded, and missing in 38 days. The 34th Infantry Division has been combat ineffective since losing 47% strength at Hill 609 and Troina. The 1st Division, supposedly America's best, needs a complete refit and won't be combat ready for months. And for what? A rocky island that Churchill called the soft underbelly of Europe has proven anything but soft. Every mile cost 190 American casualties. Every day averaged 200 dead. Bradley signs the after-action report and thinks about Hill 609, 1,900 casualties for 200 yards. He's beginning to understand that this is what modern war is. Industrial-scale killing, in exchange for tactical objectives nobody will remember. August 23rd, 1943, Bradley receives word that Eisenhower wants to see him in Algiers. The summons is cryptic, no explanation, just an order to report immediately. The flight across the Mediterranean takes 4 hours, and Bradley spends it reviewing what he's learned in 6 months of combat: that American soldiers fight well when properly led and supported, that German soldiers are tactically superior in almost every way, better trained, better equipped, more experienced, that Allied material superiority matters but can't compensate for tactical incompetence, that artillery kills more men than rifles, air power less than everyone hopes, and friendly fire more than anyone admits, that casualty figures on reports are abstractions until you visit field hospitals and see men with faces burned off, legs amputated, intestines held in by bandages. That command means signing letters to parents and lying about how their sons died, because the truth that war is random chaos where death has no meaning would be unbearable. In Algiers, Eisenhower offers Bradley the biggest job in the army: command of 1st Army for the invasion of France. It's the position everyone wants, the command that will lead the liberation of Europe. Patton assumed he'd get it. He's senior to Bradley, more experienced, more famous. But Eisenhower has seen something in Sicily that bothered him. Patton's recklessness, his willingness to sacrifice lives for glory. 2 incidents sealed Patton's fate. First, the needless casualties pursuing Montgomery to Messina. Second, Patton slapped 2 soldiers suffering from combat fatigue, calling them cowards in front of their units. The slapping incidents became public scandals. Eisenhower nearly fired Patton, then decided to save him for later use. But Patton won't lead the invasion, Bradley will. The quiet man who never seeks attention, never makes grand pronouncements, never takes unnecessary risks. The man who'll get soldiers killed only when absolutely necessary. Eisenhower explains this logic carefully, and Bradley understands what he's really saying. You're not brilliant, but you won't be stupid, and in this war, not being stupid is more valuable than being brilliant. Bradley accepts command of First Army and returns to Sicily to close out Second Corps. The campaign has taught him that he can command in combat without freezing or panicking, that he can make decisions knowing men will die from those decisions, that he can sleep at night despite the knowledge that families are receiving telegrams because of choices he made. Whether those choices were right or wrong is almost beside the point. The war moves too fast for second guessing. Tunisia and Sicily were his apprenticeship, bought with American blood. 9,000 Americans died teaching Bradley how to be a general. The education isn't complete. Normandy will teach him things Sicily couldn't. But he's learned the fundamental lesson of command, that someone must decide, and the decision must be made. And afterward you live with the consequences, because the alternative is paralysis. Bradley learned this in Sicily. The lesson cost 9,000 lives. But in Normandy, that knowledge will save tens of thousands more. October 1st, 1943, Bradley arrives in Bristol, England, to assume command of an army that doesn't exist. First Army headquarters consists of 17 officers in borrowed office space, armed with maps, telephones, and orders to build an invasion force from scratch. The army Bradley will command on D-Day currently numbers exactly 0 combat-ready divisions. Over the next 8 months, he must transform hundreds of thousands of newly arrived troops into 18 divisions capable of storming Hitler's Atlantic Wall. The task is staggering in scope and terrifying in implication. If Bradley fails, if his army isn't ready, the invasion fails, and the war might be lost. No pressure, Eisenhower told him in Algiers, offering a thin smile. Just organize the largest amphibious invasion in human history and try not to get 50,000 men killed on the first day. The planning for Operation Overlord, the code name for the Normandy invasion, reveals immediately that this will be exponentially more complex than anything attempted in North Africa or Sicily. The original British plan called for 3 divisions landing on 3 beaches across a 25-mile front. Montgomery, now commanding all ground forces for the invasion, looks at the plan and declares it suicidal. Not enough beaches, not enough troops, not enough depth. He demands expanding to 5 beaches across 50 miles, landing 8 divisions in the first wave. This requires 2,000 additional landing craft that don't exist, will take 6 months to build, and forces postponing the invasion from May to June 1944. Bradley supports Montgomery's assessment. The broader front reduces the risk of catastrophic failure on any single beach. If one landing fails, the others can still succeed. It's sound military logic, but it introduces a new variable: time. Every month of delay gives Germans more time to strengthen defenses, more time to move reinforcements, more time to prepare. January 15th, 1944, Street, Paul School in London, commandeered as invasion planning headquarters. Bradley sits through the most important military briefing of his life. Montgomery presents the revised plan. British Second Army will land on Gold, Juno and Sword beaches on the eastern flank. Bradley's First Army will land on Utah and Omaha beaches on the western flank. The American objectives are ambitious: secure the Koppen Peninsula, capture Cherbourg's port facilities, break out into the French interior. Bradley studies the maps and focuses on Omaha Beach, a 6-mile stretch of sand backed by 100-foot bluffs. The beach has no ports, no shelter, no cover. German defenders will have clear fields of fire from the bluffs. Landing craft will have to cross 400 yards of open beach under machine gun and artillery fire. Bradley raises concerns about Omaha's vulnerability. Montgomery waves them off. Air and naval bombardment will neutralize defenses before troops land. Bradley doesn't believe this, but lacks the authority to change the plan. The intelligence picture for Omaha Beach is incomplete and increasingly worrying. Aerial reconnaissance shows German positions on the bluffs, concrete bunkers, fighting positions, barbed wire obstacles, but reconnaissance can't reveal how many Germans are actually there or how motivated they are to fight. The working assumption is that Omaha is defended by a single static infantry division, older soldiers, limited combat experience, not expected to resist strongly. This assumption is based on decrypted German communications, aerial photos, and reports from French resistance. It's also catastrophically wrong. Unknown to Allied intelligence, The German 352nd Infantry Division has moved into the Omaha sector in late March 1944 for training exercises and simply stayed. The 352nd is a combat division, younger soldiers, recent Eastern Front experience, well-equipped and aggressive. On D-Day, instead of facing one depleted regiment, American forces at Omaha will hit 3 battalions of hardened infantry. Bradley doesn't know this yet. When he finds out, it will be too late. March 27th, 1944. Exercise Tiger. Slapton Sands, Devon. The final full-scale rehearsal for Utah Beach invasion becomes a disaster that Bradley will fight to keep secret for decades. 30,000 American troops practice amphibious assault on English beaches that resemble Normandy. The rehearsal goes badly, landing craft hit beaches at wrong locations, communications break down, coordination between Navy and Army collapses. Then, at 01:30 hours on April 28th, German U-boats, fast torpedo boats, slip through British destroyer screen and attack the convoy. 2 tank landing ships explode and sink within minutes. A third is crippled and drifts, burning through the night. 749 American soldiers and sailors die, more than will die, on Utah Beach during the actual invasion. Bodies wash up on Devon beaches for days afterward. Bradley orders immediate classification of the incident. The Germans must not learn that Allied invasion rehearsals are happening in this area. Families of the dead are told their sons died in training accidents. No details are provided. The secrecy is operationally necessary and morally devastating. May 15, 1944. Final Command Conference at St. Paul's School. King George VI, Winston Churchill, the British War Cabinet, and every senior Allied commander gathered to review the plan one last time. Bradley briefs the American sector. 5 regimental combat teams landing in the first wave at Utah and Omaha. 50,000 men hitting the beaches by noon. 73,000 by sunset. The Navy will deliver 1,500 rockets and 10,000 tons of bombs onto beach defenses. Air forces will drop 13,000 tons on coastal fortifications. The overwhelming firepower should neutralize German resistance. Churchill is skeptical. He's seen amphibious operations fail before, Gallipoli in World War I, Dieppe, in 1942. He asks Bradley what happens if the Germans counterattack with armor before the beachhead is consolidated. Bradley's answer is honest. If German panzer divisions reach the beaches in the first 48 hours, the invasion will fail. Everything depends on speed, getting off the beaches, moving inland, establishing defensive perimeter before German reinforcements arrive. Churchill looks at the maps and says nothing. He's thinking about Gallipoli, about British troops slaughtered on Turkish beaches 30 years ago. He's wondering if Normandy will be another Gallipoli, another generation fed into machine guns. June 1st, 1944. Bradley moves 1st Army headquarters to Portsmouth. Final staging area for the invasion. The city is choked with troops and equipment, every street filled with trucks, every field covered with supply dumps, every harbor packed with landing craft. Security is suffocating. The entire southern coast of England is sealed, nobody in, nobody out. German spies almost certainly know an invasion is coming, but they don't know where or when. Allied deception operations have convinced German high command the invasion will hit past to Calais, the shortest crossing point. Normandy is considered a possible diversion but not the main effort. This deception is working perfectly, and Bradley prays it continues working through D-Day and beyond. If Germans move their panzer reserves to Normandy before the beachhead is secure, 50,000 Americans might die for nothing. June 4, 1944. The invasion fleet sits in harbors, loaded and ready, waiting for weather. Eisenhower scheduled D-Day for June 5th, but meteorologists report storms in the channel, high winds, heavy seas, low clouds that would prevent air support. Eisenhower postpones 24 hours. Ships that already sailed return to port. 175,000 men sit on transports, vomiting from seasickness, terrified about what's coming. Bradley paces his headquarters, reviewing casualty estimates for Omaha Beach. The optimistic projection is 10% casualties in the first wave, 1,500 men. Pessimistic is 30%, 4,500 men. Worst cases, 50%, 6,700 casualties. Before the sun sets on D-Day, Bradley has approved a plan that might kill 6,700 Americans on a single beach in a single afternoon. The weight of that decision is crushing. He tries to sleep in cart. June 5, 1944, 04:15 hours. Eisenhower's final weather conference at Suffolk House. Captain James Stagg, chief meteorologist, reports a brief window of marginally acceptable weather on June 6. Winds will drop slightly. Cloud ceiling will lift enough for limited air operations. It's not good weather, just barely acceptable. The next opportunity won't come for weeks, possibly months. And waiting means the invasion forces will have to unload and reload, security will collapse, and the Germans will figure out where the blow is coming. Eisenhower polls his commanders. Montgomery says go, Bradley says go, but emphasizes the weather makes Omaha Beach even more dangerous. Rough seas will swamp landing craft, high winds will scatter paratroopers, low clouds will limit air support. Eisenhower walks outside, stands in the rain for 5 minutes, and returns. Okay, he says. We'll go. The decision is made. In 24 hours, 56,000 Americans will storm Hitler's Atlantic Wall, and Bradley will watch from a command ship 11 miles offshore, unable to affect the outcome, reduced to spectator, at the most important moment of his life. Bradley spends the last hours before invasion writing letters to senior commanders, reviewing contingency plans, checking equipment lists, busy work, all of it, because there's nothing left to do. The plan is set, the troops are moving, and the outcome is now in the hands of young men who will hit the beaches at dawn. Bradley thinks about them constantly, the 18 and 19-year-old boys from Iowa and Texas and New York, who've never been in combat, who've trained for months for this moment, who believe the training will save them. He thinks about the lieutenants who'll lead them, 22-year-old college graduates commissioned 6 months ago who've never seen anyone die. He thinks about the sergeants who'll actually hold units together when officers are killed. And he thinks about the letters he'll have to write to parents, explaining how their sons died heroically for freedom, when the truth is they died confused and terrified in the surf at Omaha Beach. The letters haunt him already, and he hasn't written them yet. Dawn comes. The fleet sails. And Bradley boards the USS Augusta, bound for Normandy, and a beach that will nearly destroy everything. June 6, 1944, 06:30 hours, the ramps drop on the first landing craft at Omaha Beach, and Company A, 1st Battalion, 116th Infantry Regiment enters history. They wade through chest-deep water toward a beach that's supposed to be cratered by bombs and cleared by naval gunfire. Instead, they face intact German bunkers, spitting machine gun fire at 600 rounds per minute. The first man off the ramp dies instantly, shot through the throat. The second is hit in the chest. The third makes it 3 steps before his legs are cut from under him. Within 90 seconds, Company A loses 30 men killed and 40 wounded without firing a shot. Survivors huddle behind steel beach obstacles, pinned in rising tide, watching their friends drown because they're too wounded to stand. Captain Taylor Feller's radios for help and get static. The radios are waterlogged and useless. Company A has ceased to exist as a fighting unit. 0700 hours, and the invasion is failing. Aboard the USS Augusta, 11 miles offshore, Bradley receives the first reports at 07:15. They're fragmentary and contradictory. One message reports heavy resistance at Omaha. Another says easy red sector is secure. A third requests immediate medical evacuation for mass casualties. Bradley tries to piece together what's happening from radio intercepts and visual observations, but smoke from the naval bombardment obscures the beach. He can see landing craft approaching shore. He can see explosions on the bluffs, but he can't see the men dying in the surf, can't hear the screaming, can't know that companies are being annihilated in minutes. At 0800, a message arrives from the 5th Corps. Obstacles mined, progress slow. Bradley's stomach drops. Progress slow is military euphemism. It means the attack has stalled. It means men are dying faster than they're advancing. 0900 hours, Bradley makes the most important decision of D-Day. Rear Admiral John Hall, commanding naval forces at Omaha, recommends evacuating the beach and redirecting troops to Utah, where the landing is succeeding. It's a sound tactical proposal. Utah Beach is going well. The 4th Infantry Division landed in the wrong sector but found it lightly defended and pushed inland rapidly. Concentrating forces at Utah while abandoning Omaha would reduce casualties and simplify logistics. But abandoning Omaha means the British beaches will be isolated, the invasion front split, and German forces will have interior lines to defeat each landing separately. Bradley refuses. He commits the reserve regiments, the 18th and 115th Infantry, to Omaha despite having no clear picture of where they'll land or what they'll face. It's a decision made in informational darkness, betting 50,000 lives that the beach can be saved. If he's wrong, historians will compare Omaha to Gallipoli, and Bradley will be remembered as the general who threw wave after wave of men into machine guns until the sea ran red. On Omaha Beach, Survival comes down to individual initiative and collective desperation. At 10:30 hours, Brigadier General Norman Coda, Assistant Division Commander of the 29th Infantry Division, lands with the second wave. He finds 2,000 men huddled behind the seawall, paralyzed by fear and suppressing fire. Officers are dead or wounded. Sergeants are trying to organize groups to move forward, but moving forward means running across 50 yards of open ground swept by machine gun fire from 3 directions. Coda walks up and down the seawall, exposing himself to fire, shouting at soldiers to move. His most famous quote: "Two kinds of people are staying on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here." Maybe apocryphal, but the sentiment is accurate. Coda leads a group through a minefield, up a ravine, and over the bluffs. They reach the top at 1100 hours, 3 men for every 10 who started. But they reach the top. The seawall begins to empty as other groups follow. At 1100 hours, the USS McCook, a Fletcher-class destroyer, makes a decision that saves the invasion. Commander Ralph Ramey watches landing craft burning at the waterline, sees men dying on the beaches, and decides he can't just fire from offshore. He orders his ship to beach itself to drive onto the sand and engage German bunkers at point-blank range. The McCook grounds in 8 feet of water, 300 yards from the bluffs. Her 5-inch guns can now fire directly into German positions at 900-yard range. For 90 minutes, the McCook systematically destroys bunkers, pillboxes, and fighting positions. Other destroyers follow her lead. 12 destroyers risk grounding to provide direct fire support. It's the naval gunfire that should have happened at dawn, happening instead at noon, and it turns the battle. German defenders can't survive. 5-inch shells exploding inside their bunkers. By 1300 hours, the beach fortifications are collapsing. At 1300 hours, Bradley finally receives accurate reports from Omaha. 5th Corps message traffic indicates the beach is secured and troops are moving inland. Casualties are described as moderate, another euphemism Bradley will later discover means catastrophic. He feels relief flooding through him, physical and overwhelming. The beach held. The reserves are landing. The invasion continues. But he doesn't yet know the cost. 2,400 Americans are dead, wounded, or missing at Omaha Beach. Companies that landed with 200 men now number 30. Battalions are scattered across 10 miles of beach and bluffs. Cohesion destroyed. Command and control non-existent. The 29th Infantry Division will spend 2 days just locating all its units and determining who's still alive. Omaha Beach succeeded, but it succeeded as a near-run thing. Success defined as didn't fail completely. June 6, 2400 hours. Bradley goes ashore at Omaha Beach and walks among the dead. Bodies lie in rows above the high tide line, arranged by graves registration teams who work through the night identifying remains and recovering personal effects. Some bodies are intact, killed by single bullets or shrapnel. Others are in pieces, destroyed by artillery or mines. Bradley walks slowly, looking at faces, most of them younger than his daughter. He tries to see them as statistics, necessary losses in a larger operation, and fails completely. Each body is a person who woke up that morning, ate breakfast, made jokes to calm his nerves, and walked into machine gun fire because Bradley ordered him to. The weight of that is crushing. 2,400 casualties. The number is abstract until you walk among them, until you see that every number is a face. The after-action analysis of Omaha Beach reveals systematic failures at every level. The pre-invasion bombing missed almost entirely. 10,000 tons of bombs dropped 3 miles inland, not on beach defenses, because bombardiers couldn't see through clouds and released late to avoid hitting landing craft. Naval gunfire was too brief and too distant. Destroyers fired from 6,000 yards instead of point-blank range until the morning crisis forced them closer. Intelligence failed to detect the 352nd Infantry Division occupying Omaha's defenses, a complete failure that should have been impossible with Allied air superiority and French resistance providing regular reports. And the plan itself was flawed, assuming bombardment would neutralize defenses, when historical evidence from Tarawa and Sicily showed bombardment rarely worked as expected. Bradley reviews these failures and accepts his share of responsibility. He approved the plan. He believed the assurances about bombardment effectiveness. He failed to question assumptions. But Omaha Beach also succeeded because of individual courage and decentralized initiative. When command and control collapsed, small unit leaders, sergeants, lieutenants, even privates took charge and led men forward. Engineers cleared obstacles under fire. Medics treated wounded while bullets snapped overhead. Naval officers beached their ships to provide fire support. Every one of these decisions involved risking death to save others, and enough men made the right decision that the invasion survived. Bradley will spend the rest of his life wrestling with the moral accounting of Omaha Beach. 2,400 casualties for a successful landing. Was that acceptable? Could he have planned better, reduced losses? Or was Omaha's cost simply the price of storming an enemy beach, and any plan would have produced similar casualties? He doesn't know. He'll never know. But he'll keep asking the question until the day he dies. June 7th, 1944, 0 to 600 hours. Bradley moves 1st Army headquarters ashore. The beachhead is 5 miles deep, 40 miles wide, and holds 126,000 American troops. German counterattacks have been repulsed. Reinforcements are landing on schedule. The invasion has succeeded, not brilliantly, not easily, but succeeded nonetheless. Bradley stands on the bluffs above Omaha Beach and watches landing craft shuttle troops ashore. The beach is unrecognizable from yesterday, cleared of obstacles, bulldozed smooth, marked with signs directing traffic. Bodies are gone, buried in temporary graves, or removed to morgue ships. The blood is washed away by the tide. Within 48 hours, all evidence of the slaughter will disappear, except for shattered bunkers and empty shell casings. But Bradley will remember. He'll remember standing on this bluff, watching men die. He'll remember the reports arriving in fragmentary chaos. He'll remember deciding to commit reserves without knowing if it would save the invasion or just kill more men faster. Memory doesn't fade, doesn't soften. Omaha Beach will follow Bradley forever, a reminder of what command actually means. June 12th, 1944, 07:30 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole leads the 5I 2nd Parachute Infantry Regiment through a hedgerow near Carrington, and the world explodes. German machine guns open fire from the next field, invisible, perfectly positioned, interlocking fields of fire that turn the narrow lane into a killing ground. Cole's lead company goes to ground, pinned against an earthen embankment that's 8 feet high and 4 feet thick, crowned with centuries-old hedges so dense they stop bullets. The Americans are trapped in a space 20 yards long and 6 feet wide. They can't advance, the machine guns will cut them down. They can't retreat, that means abandoning wounded men. They can't flank, every field is a separate fortress connected by sunken lanes that channel movement into predictable paths. Cole radios for artillery support and gets nothing forward. Observers can't see German positions through the hedgerows. Welcome to the bocage, the Norman hedgerow country that no one planned for, and that will trap Bradley's army for 7 weeks. The hedgerows of Normandy are agricultural features that date back to Roman times. Norman farmers built earthen embankments to mark property boundaries, then planted hedges on top, blackberry, hawthorn, oak trees growing into each other over centuries. The result is a landscape of 50,000 individual fields, each surrounded by walls of earth and vegetation, 8 to 12 feet high. From the air, Normandy looks like a neat patchwork quilt. At ground level, it's a maze where you can't see more than 100 yards in any direction. Allied planners studied aerial photos of Normandy for months and somehow failed to understand what hedgerows would mean for mechanized warfare. Tanks can't drive through them, the embankments are too steep, the roots too thick. Infantry can't see over them, every field is a separate battle. Artillery can't suppress defenders. German soldiers hide in the hedgerows themselves, immune to shrapnel. Bradley's First Army, designed for mobile warfare across open terrain, has stumbled into fighting conditions that resemble World War I trench warfare crossed with urban combat. June 18th, 1944. Bradley makes a decision that will haunt him for decades. He authorizes Operation Chatterbox, the aerial bombardment of Cherbourg. The port city sits at the tip of the Cotentin Peninsula, garrisoned by 40,000 German troops who've received Hitler's direct order to defend it to the last man. Cherbourg's capture is essential. The invasion requires port facilities to sustain the growing Allied armies in France, but Cherbourg's defenses are formidable. Concrete fortifications, extensive minefields, and a German commander, Lieutenant General Karl Wilhelm von Schleben, who has no intention of surrendering. Bradley requests heavy bomber support to soften defenses before the grand assault. The request is approved. On June 22nd, 1,135 Allied bombers dropped 2,000 tons of high explosive on Cherbourg. The raid kills approximately 1,400 French civilians. German fortifications, built to withstand bombardment, survive, largely intact. Bradley watches the bombing from a forward observation post, and realizes he's just killed 1,400 French people to achieve negligible military effect. The battle for Cherbourg captures the city but destroys the port. German engineers, following prepared demolition plans, systematically wreck every crane, blow up every pier, sink ships in every channel, and mine every warehouse. When American troops enter the port on June 27th, they find a landscape of deliberate destruction, so thorough it will take months to restore basic functionality. The port facilities that were supposed to supply the invasion won't be operational until September, 3 months after capture. Bradley's gamble accepting civilian casualties to speed Cherbourg's capture has failed completely. The port is useless, the civilians are dead, and the invasion will have to be supplied over the beaches far longer than planned. The failure is strategic and moral. Bradley authorizes an after-action review that carefully avoids assigning blame, but makes clear that bombing cities to capture infrastructure is counterproductive when the enemy is willing to destroy that infrastructure anyway. July 3, 1944, the 83rd Infantry Division attacks German positions near La Haye-du-Pritz, a miserable little town in the Bocage that has no strategic value except that it sits between American forces and the ground they need to capture. The attack opens with standard tactics: artillery barrage, infantry assault, armor support. Within 2 hours the attack is stalled. German machine gun nests hidden in hedgerows cut down the first wave. American tanks attempting to cross hedgerow embankments expose their thin belly armor and are destroyed by German Panzerfaust rockets. Infantry advancing along sunken lanes are hit by pre-registered artillery. By nightfall, the 83rd Division has gained 400 yards and suffered 380 casualties. The next day, they gain another 300 yards and lose 400 men. By July 10th, after 7 days of continuous combat, the division has advanced 3 miles and suffered 4,000 casualties. La Haye-du-Pritz falls on July 8th, and nobody remembers why it mattered. The casualty rates in the Bocage are unsustainable and terrifying. First Army is losing approximately 2,000 men per day, killed, wounded, or missing. Entire companies are being wiped out, fighting for fields that don't appear on maps. The 29th Infantry Division, rebuilt after Omaha Beach, loses another 3,400 men in 3 weeks of Bocage fighting. The 4th Infantry Division loses 4,500. The 90th Infantry Division, newly arrived from England, loses 5,000 men in its first 2 weeks of combat and has to be pulled from the line for reconstitution. Bradley watches his army being bled white, gaining ground measured in hundreds of yards. Eisenhower sends increasingly urgent messages asking when the breakout will begin. Bradley has no answer. There is no breakout. There is only grinding attrition that resembles the Western Front in 1917. July 11th, 1944, Bradley watches a demonstration that might solve the hedgerow problem. Sergeant Curtis Cullen of the 2nd Armored Division has welded scrap steel from German beach obstacles onto the front of a Sherman tank, creating crude steel prongs. When the tank hits a hedgerow embankment, instead of climbing up and exposing its belly, the prongs bite into the earth and the tank smashes straight through. The modification is brilliant in its simplicity, no complex engineering, just brute force applied correctly. Bradley immediately orders production of 500 Rhino attachments. Within 2 weeks, most First Army tanks are equipped with Cullen hedgerow cutters. The modification doesn't end the Bocage fighting. German infantry still have to be cleared from every field, but it allows American armor to support infantry instead of being channeled into killing zones. It's a small innovation that saves hundreds of lives. Invented by an enlisted man because officers couldn't solve the problem. July 18th, 1944. Operation Goodwood, Montgomery's massive armored offensive east of Caen, collapses after 3 days of fighting. Montgomery committed 3 British armored divisions, nearly 800 tanks, in an attempt to break through German defenses and capture the open ground south of Caen. The attack gained 7 miles and cost 413 tanks destroyed. German defenses held. Montgomery declares the operation a success because it tied down German armor that might otherwise have counterattacked American positions. Bradley is skeptical. Goodwood looks like failure, huge casualties for minimal gains, and the British failure increases pressure on Bradley to achieve a breakout in the American sector. Eisenhower is losing patience. Churchill is asking pointed questions. The newspapers are starting to compare Normandy to World War I stalemate. Bradley needs a breakthrough, and he needs it before the alliance fractures under the weight of casualties and recrimination. July 21st, 1944. Bradley finalizes plans for Operation Cobra, the offensive that will either break the stalemate or confirm that Allied armies are stuck in France indefinitely. The concept is brutally simple. Concentrate overwhelming force on a narrow front. Use strategic bombers to obliterate German defenses, then punch through with armor and exploit into open country. The target is a 3-mile by 1-mile rectangle of Norman farmland near Saint-Lô. Bradley requests 2,400 heavy bombers to drop 4,000 tons of high explosive onto this rectangle, pulverizing everything inside it. It's the largest tactical bombing mission ever planned, using strategic bombers designed to hit cities and factories, to destroy field fortifications and frontline troops. The risks are enormous. The bombers will fly parallel to the front lines, meaning any short drops will hit American positions. Friendly fire is almost certain. But Bradley sees no alternative. Infantry assaults in the barrage produce 4,000 casualties per mile. Cobra might produce the same casualties in one day instead of spreading them over weeks. It's a calculated gamble that American industrial might can substitute for tactical elegance. The decision to proceed with Cobra despite known friendly fire risks reveals something fundamental about Bradley's command philosophy. He's not reckless, he understands the dangers and has tried to minimize them. But he's also willing to accept American casualties from American bombs, if the alternative is watching his army bleed out in the hedgerows. It's a cold calculation that reduces human lives to mathematical probabilities. If Cobra works, a few hundred friendly fire casualties might save thousands in the subsequent breakout. If it fails, Bradley will have killed his own troops for nothing. The decision keeps him awake at night. He reviews the bombing plans obsessively, checking approach vectors and safety margins. He knows the margins are inadequate, knows that bombs dropped from 20,000 feet will drift, that formations will break up, that mistakes will happen. He knows it and approves the operation anyway because the alternative is watching 2,000 Americans die every day indefinitely. Command means making impossible choices. Cobra is the most impossible choice Bradley has made so far. July 24th, 1944, 1300 hours. The first Cobra bombing mission goes catastrophically wrong. 355 bombers approach the target rectangle, but cloud cover obscures visual identification. Some bombardiers release early, others aim at smoke markers that have drifted in the wind. Bombs fall on American positions. The 30th Infantry Division, positioned directly north of the target zone, takes the brunt of the friendly fire. 25 Americans are killed, 131 wounded. Among the dead is Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theater, observing the attack from a forward position. Bradley is devastated. He immediately halts the operation and demands explanations. The Air Force admits the approach vector parallel to the front lines, instead of perpendicular, created unacceptable risks. Bradley explodes. That's exactly what he warned about. Exactly what he tried to prevent. But the Air Force insisted parallel approaches were necessary for bomber safety. Now 25 Americans are dead because Bradley couldn't win a bureaucratic argument. He orders the attack rescheduled, and despite the disaster, orders the same parallel approach. There's no time to replan everything. Cobra will proceed on July 25th, and they'll just have to pray the bombing is more accurate. July 25th, 1944, 0938 hours. The sky over Saint-Lô turns black with bombers, wave after wave of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, 1,500 heavy bombers carrying 3,300 tons of high explosive, medium bombers add another 400 tons, fighter bombers contribute napalm and fragmentation bombs. For 90 minutes, the earth convulses under the heaviest tactical bombardment in history. Inside the target rectangle, German soldiers of the Panzer Division crouch in bunkers and pray. Those caught in the open simply disintegrate. Human bodies can't survive 500-pound bombs exploding at 50-yard intervals. Trees are uprooted, roads cratered, buildings pulverized. The Panzer Division commander, General Fritz Bayerlein, survives in a concrete bunker and emerges to find his division destroyed. 70% casualties, most vehicles burning, communications gone, survivors wandering shell-shocked and bleeding. Bayerlein radios back that his division has ceased to exist as a fighting force, but the price of Cobra is paid first by Americans. Despite Air Force assurances that the second bombing would be more accurate, short drops begin almost immediately. Bombs fall on the 30th Infantry Division for the second time in 2 days. This time the slaughter is worse. 111 Americans killed, 490 wounded. An entire battalion of the 120th Infantry Regiment is decimated, losing half its effective strength in 15 minutes of friendly fire. Lieutenant General Leslie McNair's death from the previous day is joined by hundreds of enlisted men, whose names won't appear in history books, but whose families will receive telegrams saying they died heroically in France. The irony is savage. They died from American bombs dropped by American pilots trying to help them. Bradley receives casualty reports and feels physically ill. 2 days of bombing, 136 Americans killed by their own air force. But the attack must continue. Stopping now means those deaths are completely meaningless. At 1400 hours, the ground assault begins. The 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, veterans of North Africa, Sicily, and Omaha Beach, attacks through the smoking crater that used to be German front lines. They advance cautiously, expecting resistance. They find devastation instead. The bombing has been so thorough that organized defense is impossible. German survivors stumble toward American lines with hands raised, too shell-shocked to fight. Some are deaf from the concussion, others are bleeding from eyes and ears. The few who try to resist are killed quickly. By nightfall, the 1st Infantry Division has advanced 1 mile, not much by mobile warfare standards, but an enormous gain compared to bocage fighting, where 1 mile cost 4,000 casualties. The breakthrough hasn't happened yet, but the breakthrough is possible. The German line is cracked. Now Bradley needs to exploit before he heals. July 26, 1944, the 2nd Armored Division Hell on Wheels pours through the gap opened by the 1st Infantry Division. For the first time since D-Day, American armor operates in open terrain against disorganized resistance. They advance 5 miles in 1 day, overrunning German supply dumps, capturing artillery positions before crews can remove the breach blocks, and leaving chaos in their wake. German commanders try to organize counterattacks but lack the forces to do so. Panzer-Lehr Division is destroyed, 352nd Infantry Division is combat ineffective, and reinforcements are being misdirected to pass to Calais because German intelligence still believes a second invasion is coming there. The German front in Normandy is collapsing, and German commanders know it. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, commanding all German forces in France, sends increasingly desperate messages to Hitler, asking for permission to withdraw. Hitler refuses. Hold every inch of ground, he orders. Retreat is forbidden. July 28, 1944. American forces capture Cadences and trap 30,000 German troops in a pocket south of the town. The encirclement is Bradley's first successful operational maneuver, using mobility and firepower to surround and destroy enemy forces instead of just pushing them back. German units caught in the pocket attempt to escape south, abandoning equipment and wounded. American artillery and air power turn the escape routes into slaughter zones. Estimates suggest 10,000 Germans are killed and 20,000 captured in the Cadences pocket. It's the kind of decisive victory that Bradley studied at Fort Benning in the 1920s but never thought he'd execute. The Wehrmacht, supposedly the most professional army in the world, has just been operationally defeated by an American army that didn't exist 3 years ago. The implications are staggering. Germany can't replace these losses. America can replace anything. July 30th, 1944, 1100 hours. The 4th Armored Division enters Avranches, a town that controls the roads into Brittany and the Loire Valley. Avranches is the gateway. Once through it, Allied armies can spread out across France instead of being compressed into the Norman bocage. The capture happens so quickly that German demolitions don't have time to destroy the bridges. American engineers seize the Avranches bridges intact and hold them against counterattacks. By nightfall, 3 American divisions are streaming through Avranches into open country. The Normandy campaign, stuck in bloody stalemate for 7 weeks, has suddenly exploded into mobile warfare. Bradley's plan is working. Cobra has succeeded. The bocage nightmare is over. But the price was catastrophic. 40,000 American casualties in 7 weeks, most of them infantry replacements, who arrived in June and died in July fighting for fields nobody remembers. August 1st, 1944. The command structure changes, and Bradley's status changes with it. He's promoted to command 12th Army Group, all American forces in France, eventually growing to 4 field armies and 1,300,000 men. Courtney Hodges assumes command of 1st Army, and George Patton's 3rd Army is officially activated, emerging from secrecy, where it existed as a deception operation to fool Germans about a second invasion. Patton now commands 4 divisions, with orders to exploit the Cobra breakthrough. Bradley's relationship with Patton has inverted in Tunisia and Sicily. Patton was Bradley's superior. Now, Bradley commands Patton. The reversal is awkward and potentially explosive. Patton is senior in age and experience. junior only, in current assignment. He resents being subordinate to Bradley, resents that the slapping incidents in Sicily cost him the army command he believed he'd earned. But Patton is also a realist. He understands that Bradley's quiet competence has won Eisenhower's trust, while Patton's theatrics have cost him. So Patton salutes, says yes sir, and begins planning the campaign that will make him famous. The decision Bradley makes on August 1st will be debated by historians for decades. He sends Patton west into Brittany instead of east toward Paris. The logic seems sound at the time. Brittany contains the ports of Brest, Lorient, and Saint-Nazaire, major facilities that could supply the Allied advance far better than the Norman beaches. Capturing Brittany ports is part of the original invasion plan, and Bradley is following the plan. But the plan was written before Cobra succeeded, before the German front collapsed, before the opportunity arose to race east and trap the entire German army in France. Sending Patton west means frittering away his armor, capturing ports that German garrisons will render useless through demolition. Sending him east means potentially ending the war in France in August instead of December. Bradley chooses the ports. It's a conservative, by-the-book decision that costs months and thousands of lives. But in August 1944, with German forces reeling and the situation fluid, conservative seems prudent. Bradley doesn't yet understand that conservative and prudent are luxuries you can't afford when the enemy is collapsing. August 8, 1944, 0 to 300 hours. German forces launch Operation Lüttich, a desperate counterattack toward Ardennes designed to cut off American forces that have broken through into Brittany and southern France. Hitler personally ordered the attack, stripping the last mobile reserves from across France and committing them to a single thrust. 116 panzers, supported by infantry, attack westward toward Mortain, trying to reach Avranches and seal the breach. The attack achieves complete tactical surprise. American forces at Mortain are overrun, and for 6 hours it looks like the German gamble might succeed. Then daylight arrives, bringing with it Allied air superiority. Rocket-firing Typhoon fighter bombers tear apart the panzer columns. American artillery, pre-registered on every approach route, drops concentrated fire on German assembly areas. By noon, Operation Lüttich has failed completely, losing 67 tanks and gaining nothing. Hitler's gamble has backfired catastrophically, committing Germany's last reserves to an offensive that never had a chance. Bradley watches the Mortain counterattack unfold and realizes Hitler has just handed him an opportunity for operational annihilation. The German forces attacking Mortain are now extended deep into Allied lines, their flanks exposed, their supply lines vulnerable. Meanwhile, British and Canadian forces are attacking south from Caen, attempting to link up with American forces driving north. If both attacks succeed, the entire German 7th Army, 15 divisions, 100,000 men, will be trapped in a pocket near Falaise. It would be the largest encirclement on the Western Front since Stalingrad, a catastrophic defeat that might end the war in France immediately. Bradley begins shifting forces north, coordinating with Montgomery to close the Falaise gap before Germans can escape. The opportunity is obvious, the execution will prove devastatingly difficult, and the argument over who failed to close the gap completely will poison Allied command relationships for the rest of the war. August 1st, 1944, 1500 hours. George Patton stands in Bradley's headquarters tent and listens to orders that should thrill him but somehow sting. Third Army is activated. Patton commands. But he commands under Bradley, his former subordinate, the quiet man who never sought glory, never made headlines, never slapped anyone. The reversal goals Patton more than he admits. In Tunisia, Patton commanded, and Bradley learned. In Sicily, Patton was the star, while Bradley played supporting role. Now Bradley commands 1,300,000 men, while Patton commands 100,000. The meritocracy Marshall created has produced this result: competence rewarded over charisma, steadiness over brilliance. Patton accepts it because he has no choice. Because refusing means ending his career, and Patton would rather serve under Bradley than not serve at all. So he salutes, calls Bradley sir, and swallows his pride. But the resentment never fully disappears. Bradley's first order to Patton is controversial, and will haunt both men: take Third Army into Brittany, and capture the ports. Patton argues for driving east instead toward Paris, toward the Seine, toward trapping the German armies before they can escape. The ports don't matter, Patton insists. Supply them over the beaches. Don't waste Third Army capturing fortified cities when the German field army is vulnerable. Bradley listens and disagrees. The original plan calls for capturing Brittany. Eisenhower expects it, the logistics staff has planned for it, and Bradley doesn't trust that the German collapse is permanent. Counterattacks might seal the breach, might trap American forces that drive too far east too quickly. Conservative thinking, safe thinking, the kind of thinking that wins wars through accumulation of small victories, rather than gambling on decisive battle. Patton takes his orders and heads west, and every historian who studies the campaign will wonder what would have happened if Bradley had sent him east instead. August 3rd, 1944. Third Army advances 400 miles in 24 hours. Not a typo, not an exaggeration. Patton's armor races across Brittany against minimal resistance, overrunning German rear areas so quickly that supply columns are captured intact, complete with fuel and ammunition. The advance is so rapid that Germans don't have time to organize defense. Towns surrender without fighting, bridges are captured before demolitions can be set. Third Army's average daily advance in August will be 13 miles per day, triple the rate the First Army managed in the Bocage. The difference isn't quality of troops or equipment, it's terrain and opposition. Brittany is open country against demoralized German garrison troops. The Bocage was close country against elite German divisions. Patton's brilliance lies in exploiting the situation he's given, but Bradley gave him the situation by breaking the German line at Saint-Lô. Patton races across France on roads that Bradley's infantry paid for with blood in the hedgerows. August 8th, 1944. Hitler's Mortain counterattack crashes into American positions and creates the opportunity for operational level encirclement. Bradley sees it immediately. German forces are extended into a salient, attacking westward, while British and Canadian forces attack south from Caen. If the two forces link up, the entire German 7th Army will be trapped. Bradley coordinates with Montgomery to create a pincer British 21st Army group from the north, American 1st Army from the south, meeting near the town of Falaise. The plan is simple and devastating. Executing it proves far harder. German forces recognize the danger and begin withdrawing east, racing to escape before the trap closes. Bradley orders Patton to swing 3rd Army north, cutting off the German retreat, but the distances are vast. The roads are clogged with refugees and retreating Germans, and Allied air power is as likely to hit friendly forces as enemy. The Falaise Gap is forming, but it's forming slowly, and time favors the Germans. August 13th, 1944. Bradley makes the most controversial decision of the France campaign. He orders American forces to halt at Ardennes and wait for British forces to close the Falaise Gap from the north. The gap is approximately 15 miles wide, a corridor through which German forces are streaming in desperate retreat. Patton is furious. Third Army is at Ardennes, 12 miles south of Falaise. British and Canadian forces are still fighting their way toward Falaise from the north. Patton wants permission to drive north, close the gap unilaterally, and trap everything inside. Bradley refuses. His orders from Montgomery specify that Ardennes is the boundary between American and British zones. American forces crossing into British zones risk friendly fire from Allied aircraft and artillery. Bradley chooses to wait for the British to reach Falaise. The decision is tactically prudent and operationally catastrophic. The wait allows 20,000 to 40,000 Germans to escape the pocket before it finally closes on August 21st. The debate over the Falaise Gap will last for decades. Critics argue Bradley was too cautious, that closing the gap immediately was worth the risk of friendly fire. Defenders argue Bradley followed proper procedure, that zone boundaries exist for good reason, and that friendly fire in the confusion of rapidly moving forces would have been catastrophic. The truth is probably somewhere between. Bradley could have closed the gap faster by taking risks he wasn't willing to take. But those risks were real. American and British forces shooting each other in the chaos, creating new gaps for Germans to exploit, turning victory into disaster. Bradley chose prudence over audacity and allowed 40,000 Germans to escape. Those 40,000 troops will fight again in Holland, at the Bulge, on the Rhine. Some of them will kill Americans in battles that might not have happened if the Falaise Gap had closed completely. The butterfly effect of command decisions is impossible to calculate, but Bradley calculates it anyway, lying awake at night wondering how many Americans died because he waited for Montgomery. August 25th, 1944. 1500 hours. Paris is liberated, and Bradley is not there. Eisenhower gave the honor to French forces, the 2nd French Armored Division under General Philippe Leclerc, with American 4th Infantry Division in support. The decision to let French forces liberate their own capital is politically astute and militarily sound. Paris doesn't need to be conquered, it needs to be symbolically reclaimed. Bradley watches from 12th Army Group headquarters, reviewing casualty reports from the Falaise battle. 1st Army and 3rd Army together suffered 11,000 casualties in August, killing approximately 50,000 Germans and capturing 100,000. The exchange ratio favors the Allies decisively, but 11,000 casualties still means 11,000 telegrams, 11,000 families destroyed. The math of war is brutal and inescapable. You win by inflicting more damage than you receive, and you measure damage in dead children who'll never come home. The Brittany campaign, Patton's race west, while the real battle happened at Falaise, produces exactly what Patton predicted: captured ports that can't be used. Brest doesn't fall until September 19th after a siege that costs 10,000 American casualties. When it falls, German engineers have destroyed every facility so thoroughly that the port won't be operational until November, by which time the war has moved 500 miles east. Lorient and Saint-Nazaire remain in German hands until the end of the war. Garrisons that surrendered Army in May 1945, months after Germany itself surrendered. The Brittany ports, which Bradley diverted the army to capture, contribute nothing to Allied logistics. Every gallon of fuel, every round of ammunition, every ration continues flowing through the Norman beaches and through Cherbourg. Historians will calculate that if 3rd Army had driven east in early August instead of west, the war might have ended in 1944. Bradley's decision to follow the plan instead of exploiting opportunity probably extended the war by 6 months, but in August 1944, following the plan seemed prudent. August 31st, 1944. Bradley reviews the month's achievements from his headquarters at Laval. 3rd Army advanced 400 miles and liberated most of Brittany and western France. 1st Army destroyed German 7th Army at Falaise and advanced to the German border. Paris is free, France is nearly liberated. The campaign that started with 2,400 casualties on Omaha Beach has become a pursuit across France. American armies are advancing faster than supply lines can support them, faster than maps can be updated, faster than Bradley imagined possible in July when his army was dying in the bocage. The transformation is stunning, from near defeat on D-Day to absolute operational dominance in 3 months, but the transformation carries a hidden cost that's just starting to become visible. American armies have outrun their supplies. The last week of August, 3rd Army ran out of gasoline and stopped moving. 1st Army is rationing ammunition. The pursuit is about to end, not because Germans stopped it, but because mathematics stopped it, and that supply crisis will reshape everything. The relationship between Bradley and Patton in August 1944 perfectly captures the paradox of their partnership. Patton produces spectacular results and resents Bradley's oversight. Bradley provides the resources and takes the risks that made Patton's operations possible. Patton races across France on fuel that Bradley diverted from other armies. Patton's casualties are low because Bradley's armies fixed German forces at Falaise. But Patton gets the headlines. Patton's 3rd Army liberates France, while Bradley works in obscurity, managing the largest American army ever fielded in combat. The dynamic goals Patton and sometimes frustrates Bradley, but it works. Patton is the brilliant, erratic racehorse that wins spectacular victories when properly managed. Bradley is the manager, providing just enough freedom and just enough constraint to channel Patton's genius while preventing his recklessness from causing disasters. It's an imperfect partnership between imperfect men, and it liberates France in 3 months. Neither man could have done it alone. September 2nd, 1944, 0 to 800 hours. 3rd Army's 4th Armored Division grinds to a halt on the banks of the Meuse River, 50 miles from the German border, and the reason is embarrassingly prosaic. They're out of gasoline. Not low on gasoline, completely out. Tanks sit with empty fuel tanks, unable to move. Trucks that should be bringing forward supplies are themselves out of fuel. The entire division, 15,000 men, 300 tanks, thousands of vehicles, has become a static museum exhibit because the supply system couldn't keep up with the advance. Patton is apoplectic. He calls Bradley and demands fuel, insisting 3rd Army could be in Germany in 48 hours if someone would just deliver the gasoline that's sitting in Normandy depots. Bradley has no gasoline to give. 1st Army needs it, British forces need it. The entire Allied army in France is running on fumes. The liberation that looked unstoppable in August has stopped cold in September, not defeated by Germans but strangled by mathematics. The supply crisis is simultaneously predictable and catastrophic. Allied planners designed the logistics system around a specific assumption. Armies would advance slowly from Normandy, capturing ports along the way, allowing supply infrastructure to keep pace. The actual campaign shattered that assumption. American armies raced across France 3 times faster than planned, capturing Paris 2 months ahead of schedule and reaching the German border by early September. But the ports aren't operational. Cherbourg is damaged. Brittany ports are besieged or demolished, and Antwerp, captured by British forces on September 4th, can't be used because Germans still hold the Scheldt estuary that controls access. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every sea ration must travel from Norman beaches across 450 miles of destroyed French roads and railways. The supply line stretches like a rubber band, and, in early September, it snaps. The Red Ball Express becomes the most famous and most inadequate solution to an impossible problem. Starting August 25th, dedicated truck convoys run 24 hours a day from Normandy to the front, carrying supplies in a continuous loop. 6,000 trucks, mostly driven by African American soldiers in segregated transportation companies, deliver supplies forward and return empty. At peak efficiency, Red Bull moves 7,000 tons per day. Sounds impressive until you realize 12th Army Group needs 20,000 tons per day just to sustain current operations. More if offensive operations resume. The math is brutal and unforgiving. Each truck burns a gallon of gasoline every 5 miles. Round trip from Normandy to the front is 900 miles. That's 180 gallons consumed per truck just to deliver fuel forward. The trucks are burning more fuel than they're delivering, a logistical, perpetual motion machine that slowly grinds to bankruptcy. September 10th, 1944. The great strategic debate that will define the autumn campaign erupts in Eisenhower's headquarters. Broad front versus narrow thrust. Montgomery proposes a concentrated offensive give British 21st Army Group and American 1st Army all available supplies. Strike north through Holland into the Ruhr industrial region, potentially ending the war by Christmas. The plan is audacious, risky, and classic. Montgomery won massive blow instead of incremental advances. Bradley proposes the opposite. Advance on a broad front, maintaining pressure everywhere, preventing Germans from concentrating reserves. It's conservative, methodical, and classic Bradley. No spectacular breakthroughs but steady accumulation of tactical victories. Patton proposes a third option. Give Third Army everything, and let him drive straight to Berlin. It's vintage Patton. Ignore logistics, ignore flanks, just attack until something breaks. Eisenhower chooses none of the above and all of the above simultaneously. He splits the difference, giving Montgomery enough supplies to attempt Operation Market Garden, an airborne offensive to seize bridges across the Rhine, while also allocating supplies to Bradley's armies to maintain pressure on the Siegfried Line. The decision satisfies nobody and commits to nothing. Montgomery gets enough resources to attempt his offensive but not enough to guarantee success. Bradley gets enough supplies to stay active but not enough to achieve breakthroughs. Patton gets nothing and fumes. The compromise is politically necessary. Eisenhower must balance British and American interests, must keep both allies engaged, must prevent his coalition from fracturing, but militarily, the compromise is disastrous. Concentrated force might have ended the war in 1944. Dispersed force guarantees another winter of killing. The distance from Normandy to the German border, 450 miles, reveals why the broad front strategy becomes inevitable despite its flaws. Even if Eisenhower concentrated everything on Montgomery's northern drive, supplying that single thrust would require the entire transportation network. There wouldn't be enough trucks to supply both Montgomery and maintain even minimal defensive postures elsewhere. The Germans could then counterattack the unsupplied sectors, potentially cutting off the concentrated thrust and turning Montgomery's audacious offensive into a catastrophic encirclement. Bradley's broad front strategy, while less exciting, reflects logistical reality. With current supply capacity, the Allies can either attack weakly everywhere, or strongly nowhere. Attacking weakly everywhere at least prevents German counteroffensives and maintains initiative. It's not brilliant, it's not inspiring, but it's achievable with available resources. September 17, 1944. Operation Market Garden launches Montgomery's airborne offensive to seize bridges across the Rhine and outflank the Siegfried Line. 35,000 paratroopers drop across Holland, attempting to capture bridges at Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem, while British ground forces drive north to link up. The plan is complex, ambitious, and assumes best-case scenarios at every step. Bridges will be captured intact. Ground forces will advance on schedule. German resistance will be minimal. None of these assumptions prove correct. German forces, though weakened, are not defeated. SS, panzer divisions, supposedly refitting far from the front, are actually in Arnhem when paratroopers land. The British 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem is isolated and destroyed. 8,000 men land, only 2,000 escape. Market Garden fails completely, costing 17,000 Allied casualties and demonstrating that concentrated offensives can't succeed without adequate logistics. Bradley watches Market Garden fail and feels vindicated and depressed in equal measure. Vindicated because Montgomery's plan proved too ambitious, too dependent on best-case scenarios, too risky. Depressed because Market Garden's failure means no breakthrough in 1944, means winter warfare on the German border, means tens of thousands more casualties grinding through fortifications. Bradley's broad front strategy is now the only strategy, not because it's brilliant but because the alternative just failed spectacularly. First Army and Third Army will batter the Siegfried Line throughout autumn, gaining ground measured in miles at costs measured in thousands. It's World War I warfare with better technology, and Bradley hates every casualty report, but he sees no alternative. The supplies don't exist to do anything else. October 1st, 1944. Bradley establishes 12th Army Group headquarters in Verdun, France, the city where France and Germany slaughtered 700,000 men, fighting over meaningless terrain in World War I. The location is symbolically oppressive and operationally convenient. From Verdun, Bradley can coordinate with 1st Army in the north and 3rd Army in the south. He reviews casualty figures from September. 1st Army lost 21,000 men, 3rd Army lost 17,000. Gains for September: 40 miles of advance, no operational breakthroughs, German defenses stabilizing. The mathematics of attrition are working in Germany's favor again. Americans replace casualties faster than Germans, but Germans don't need to replace everyone, just enough to hold defensive positions. The strategic situation has reversed from August. Then, Germans were retreating, and Americans pursuing. Now, Germans are defending prepared positions, and Americans are attacking. Defensive warfare favors the defender, roughly 3-1 in casualties. Bradley needs 3-1 numerical superiority just to break even. The supply crisis that stopped the advance in September never fully resolves. Antwerp port opens in late November, 3 months after its capture, once British and Canadian forces finally cleared Germans from the shell testery. The delay costs the Allies the opportunity to end the war in 1944. By the time Antwerp becomes operational, German forces have rebuilt defensive lines, reorganized shattered divisions, and established the Siegfried Line as a continuous front from Switzerland to the Netherlands. The race to the Rhine is over. Germans won by surviving, Allies lost by failing to exploit their August victories. Bradley will spend the rest of his life wondering what would have happened if Cherbourg had been operational in July, if Brittany ports had mattered, if Third Army had driven east instead of west in early August. The logistics crisis of September 1944 extends the war by 6 months, costs 100,000 American casualties, and proves that tactics without logistics is just theory. Bradley learned that lesson expensively. So did 50,000 families who received telegrams between September and December explaining their sons died liberating villages nobody's heard of. Patton's Third Army exemplifies both the triumph and tragedy of the autumn campaign. From August 1st through October 1st, Third Army advanced 600 miles, liberated most of France, and suffered relatively light casualties, approximately 20,000 killed and wounded. But by October, Third Army sits immobilized on the Moselle River, out of supplies, unable to advance, reduced to static warfare. Patton blames Bradley for not giving him enough fuel. Bradley blames logistics for not having fuel to give. Both are right. Patton's complaint that Third Army could have reached Germany in August if properly supplied is probably true. Bradley's defense that there weren't enough supplies to support both First Army and Third Army offensives simultaneously is also true. The Allied coalition, despite producing more material than Germany ever dreamed of, still can't deliver that material to armies that advanced faster than anyone planned. It's a failure of imagination more than capability. Allied planners built a logistics system for the war they expected, not the war they got. And when the war they got outran their plans, the advance stopped. Not because Germans stopped it, because mathematics stopped it. September 14th, 1944, 0700 hours. The 19th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, approaches the German border near Aachen and encounters the Siegfried Line for the first time. What they see stops them cold. Rows of concrete pyramid tank obstacles, Höcker, or dragon's teeth in English, stretching in perfect geometric lines across fields and roads. Behind the tank obstacles stand concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick, interlocking fields of fire, underground tunnels connecting positions. This is the West Wall, Hitler's defensive line, built in the 1930s when he still feared French invasion. Allied intelligence dismissed the Siegfried Line as outdated, undermanned, easily breached. The soldiers staring at it from 200 yards away, no intelligence was catastrophically wrong. The West Wall is 18,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and fighting positions stretching 390 miles from Switzerland to the Netherlands. Penetrating it will cost thousands of American lives. Bradley's armies have run out of weak opponents and open terrain. Now comes the hard part. The assault on Aachen becomes a preview of every battle American forces will fight between September and December. Costly, grinding, methodical destruction of urban terrain. Aachen is the first German city in the path of Allied advance, a medieval city of 160,000 civilians that Hitler has ordered defended to the last man. The German garrison numbers 5,000 troops in fortified positions throughout the city. Bradley's plan is simple. Surround Aachen, demand surrender, and if refused, destroy it. The Germans refuse. On October 8th, American artillery begins, systematically, leveling Aachen, block by block. Infantry follow the artillery, clearing buildings one room at a time. German defenders retreat to basements, then to sewers, then to bunkers, fighting until killed, or until ammunition runs out. The battle lasts 13 days, and cost the Americans 5,000 casualties. When Aachen falls on October 21st, the city is rubble. Civilians emerge from shelters to find their homes destroyed, their city unrecognizable. Bradley authorizes reconstruction aid, knowing its inadequate compensation for using artillery to achieve what diplomacy couldn't. November 2nd, 1944. Bradley approves the most controversial tactical decision of the autumn campaign: continuing offensive operations in the Hütgen forest. The Hütgen is 50 square miles of dense pine forest, steep ravines, and minimal roads along the German-Belgian border. It has no strategic value, no cities, no transportation hubs, no terrain that matters operationally. But it sits on the flank of First Army's advance toward the Rhine, and Bradley's staff argues that leaving it in German hands creates an unacceptable risk. German forces could emerge from the Hütgen to attack American supply lines. So Bradley commits division after division to clearing the forest. The 9th Infantry Division attacks in October and suffers 4,500 casualties in 3 weeks. The 28th Infantry Division attacks in November and loses 6,000 men in 10 days. The 1st Infantry Division attacks in December and bleeds out in frozen mud and artillery barrages. The Hütgen forest becomes known as the Death Factory and the Meat Grinder among American soldiers, places where entire companies disappear in hours, where artillery fire detonates in trees and sends shrapnel downward onto men who can't find cover, where visibility is measured in yards, and death comes from unseen machine guns. The forest favors defense, absolutely. German forces establish positions in concrete bunkers built during the Siegfried Line construction, positions that can't be seen from the air and can barely be targeted by artillery. American attacks follow predictable patterns: artillery barrage, infantry advance, German machine gun fire from hidden positions, American withdrawal with heavy casualties. The pattern repeats daily from September through December. By Christmas, First Army has suffered 33,000 casualties in the Hütgen, 24,000 combat casualties, and 9,000 from trench foot, frostbite, and combat fatigue. The forest is cleared house by house, tree by tree, and when it's finally secured in mid-December, everybody realizes it never mattered strategically. The decision to continue Hütgen operations despite catastrophic casualties reveals Bradley's greatest weakness as a commander. Once committed to a plan, he finds it almost impossible to abandon that plan even when evidence suggests it's failing. Bradley approved the Hütgen offensive based on staff assessments that the forest posed a threat to First Army's flank. When those assessments prove exaggerated, German forces in the Hütgen are defensive, incapable of offensive operations, Bradley doesn't cancel the operation. He commits more divisions, convinced that persistence will eventually succeed. It's the same thinking that cost lives at Hill 609 in Tunisia. If we've already paid for this ground with blood, abandoning it means those deaths were wasted. So we commit more troops, suffer more casualties, and hope the enemy breaks before we do. Sometimes the enemy breaks in the hook and Americans break first. November 16, 1944. Bradley launches the largest American offensive since Cobra, a coordinated attack along the entire Western Front designed to reach the Rhine by Christmas. First Army attacks toward Cologne. Ninth Army, newly activated under Lieutenant General William Simpson, attacks toward Düsseldorf. Third Army attacks towards Saarbrücken. The offensive involves 22 divisions, nearly 500,000 men supported by 5,000 artillery pieces and 2,000 aircraft. The attack begins with the heaviest artillery barrage since Saint-Lô, 1 million rounds fired in 24 hours, attempting to pulverize German defenses through sheer weight of explosive. The barrage sounds impressive, it accomplishes almost nothing. German fortifications, designed to withstand artillery, survive. German troops dug into bunkers and basements, wait out the bombardment, and emerged to fight when American infantry advance. By nightfall, November 16th, the Great Offensive has gained 2 miles at a cost of 4,000 casualties. Weather turns the November offensive into a nightmare that veterans will compare to World War I's worst battles. Cold rain falls continuously, turning roads to mud and fields to swamps. Visibility drops to 100 yards on good days, 50 yards on bad. Air support becomes impossible, planes can't fly, can't see targets even when they can fly. Artillery forward observers can't adjust fire because they can't see where shells are landing. Infantry advance in miserable slow motion, soaked to the skin, feet rotting in waterlogged boots, fighting hypothermia as much as Germans. Trench foot becomes epidemic. Soldiers who don't remove wet socks and dry their feet develop fungal infections that become gangrenous. First Army reports 6,000 non-combat casualties from trench foot in November alone. The front advances 5 miles in 2 weeks. The Rhine is still 40 miles away, and every casualty report carries the same note. Weather prevented evacuation. Soldier died of wounds before reaching aid station. December 1st, 1944. Bradley reviews the results of the November offensive from his headquarters in Luxembourg. First Army advanced 10 miles toward Cologne, at a cost of 18,000 casualties. Ninth Army advanced 8 miles toward Düsseldorf, losing 12,000 men. Third Army advanced 5 miles towards Saarbrücken, suffering 15,000 casualties. Total gains, less than 1 mile per day. Total cost, 45,000 American casualties in 2 weeks. The mathematics are devastating and unsustainable. At this rate, reaching the Rhine will cost 150,000 casualties, and what happened before spring? Bradley knows these numbers. He approves the continuation of offensive operations anyway, because the alternative stopping and waiting for spring means giving Germans months to rebuild forces. The logic is sound in theory. In practice, it means sending thousands more men into meat grinders like the Hook and Forest. The ammunition crisis reaches critical levels by late November. American artillery, the decisive weapon in breaking German defenses, consumes shells faster than factories can produce them and ships can deliver them. First Army alone fires 1 million artillery rounds per week during November, a consumption rate that depletes theater stockpiles to dangerously low levels. By December 1st, some artillery battalions are rationing ammunition, firing half the planned barrages, because shells simply aren't available. The shortage forces changes in tactics, more reliance on small unit infantry tactics, more night attacks to avoid German observation, more acceptance of casualties because artillery support can't be guaranteed. The irony is savage American industrial superiority, the advantage that's supposed to make victory inevitable, can't keep pace with consumption rates. Bradley's armies are outrunning their logistics again, not through rapid advance like in August, but through sustained attrition warfare that consumes material faster than the Atlantic Ocean can deliver it. By mid-December, Bradley's armies hold positions from Switzerland to the Netherlands but have achieved none of their autumn objectives. The Rhine is still uncrossed. German resistances stiffened rather than collapsed. Winter has arrived with savage cold and snow that makes offensive operations nearly impossible. First Army, battered by Hook and Forest and Siegfried Line fighting, holds a dangerously thin line in the Ardennes, a quiet sector where divisions go to rest after heavy combat. The Ardennes position is weakly held because Bradley judges it unlikely Germans can mass forces for offensive operations there. The terrain is too difficult, the roads too limited, the strategic objective too unclear. So Bradley keeps the Ardennes lightly defended while concentrating strength for offensives elsewhere. It's a calculated risk, based on intelligence assessments that German forces are incapable of major offensive operations. The assessments are catastrophically wrong, and on December 16th, Bradley will wake up to discover that every assumption he made about German capabilities has just been proven false in the most devastating way possible. December 16th, 1944, 0530 hours. The Ardennes forest explodes. From the German border to the Belgian frontier, 1,800 German artillery pieces open fire simultaneously, destroying American command posts, communication centers, and forward observation positions in minutes. Searchlights illuminate low clouds, creating artificial moonlight that turns the snow-covered forest into a surreal landscape of shadows and flashes. Then the infantry comes, 250,000 German troops and 28 divisions, supported by 1,400 tanks, attacking across an 80-mile front that Allied intelligence insisted couldn't support offensive operations. The German assault hits 4 American divisions, holding positions meant for 8. Within hours, entire battalions are surrounded. Communications are severed, and American commanders are receiving reports, too fragmentary and contradictory to make sense of what's happening. This is Hitler's final gamble, Operation Watch on the Rhine, an offensive designed to split Allied armies, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. Bradley is 70 miles from the front at his Luxembourg headquarters, eating breakfast. When the first reports arrive, Bradley's initial response to the Ardennes attack will haunt him forever. At 0 to 900 hours, when the scope of the German offensive is still unclear, Bradley tells his staff, it's probably a spoiling attack, a limited offensive, designed to disrupt First Army's planned assault toward the Roll River dams. Nothing serious, nothing that requires major response. This assessment, based on intelligence estimates that Germans lack the strength for major offensives, persists for hours while German forces punch deeper into American lines. By noon, reports indicate German penetrations of 8 miles in some sectors. Entire American regiments are cut off and fighting surrounded. 2 regiments of the 106th Infantry Division have surrendered, 7,000 men captured in a single morning, and Bradley still believes it's a local attack. Only when German forces reach Bastogne on December 17th does Bradley realize he's facing the largest German offensive of the Western campaign. His reaction, captured by an aide and quoted in every history: "Where the hell has this son of a bitch gotten all this strength?" The intelligence failure preceding the bulge is comprehensive and devastating. Ultra intercepts, decoded German communications, gave no warning because Germans maintained radio silence before the attack, using couriers and telephone lines that couldn't be intercepted. Aerial reconnaissance missed the German build-up because weather kept Allied planes grounded throughout early December. Human intelligence from Belgian resistance reported unusual German movements, but these reports were dismissed as exaggerations. The result: Bradley's staff concluded Germans were incapable of offensive operations, when, actually, Germans were massing the largest striking force they'd assembled since 1940. The failure is institutional, not individual. Everybody believed the same false narrative, but the cost falls on soldiers who found themselves outnumbered 5 to 1, surrounded, and fighting for survival because their commanders didn't believe the attack was coming. December 17th, 1944, 1400 hours. The Normandy massacre. SS troops execute 84 American prisoners in a field near the Belgian town of Normandy becomes the atrocity that defines the bulge. The soldiers are prisoners from the 7-8 Field Artillery Battalion, captured during the German advance. SS Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Piper, commanding the Spearhead Battle Group, orders them assembled in a field. Machine guns open fire. Survivors are shot individually as they try to crawl away. News of the massacre reaches Bradley that evening through fragmentary reports and explodes across the American army within hours. The effect on American troops is immediate and dark. Prisoners will not be reliably taken. SS troops attempting to surrender will be shot. The rules of warfare, already strained, collapse completely in some sectors. Bradley doesn't order reprisals, doesn't need to. The soldiers deliver their own justice. December 19, 1944. Verdun Conference. The meeting that will save the Allied position begins with Eisenhower asking a simple question: the present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us, and not of disaster. It's not really a question. It's a command: stop panicking and start counterattacking. Bradley sits across from Montgomery and Patton, the three men who'll determine how the battle unfolds. Montgomery advocates defensive concentration, pull back, shorten lines, wait for Germans to exhaust themselves. Patton advocates immediate counterattack. Third Army can disengage from current operations, pivot 90 degrees north, and attack the German southern flank within 48 hours. Bradley is skeptical. Disengaging 3 divisions, moving them 100 miles in winter conditions, and launching coordinated attacks in 2 days seems impossible. Patton insists it's not only possible, but already planned. He anticipated this meeting, and has movement orders ready. Eisenhower approves Patton's plan. Bradley leaves Verdun knowing the next 72 hours will determine whether the war is won in 1945 or lost indefinitely. December 20, 1944, the most humiliating moment of Bradley's career, arrives by telephone. Eisenhower informs him that Montgomery will assume command of 1st Army and 9th Army, all American forces north of the German penetration. Bradley will retain command only of 3rd Army, south of the Bulge. The decision is operationally sound. Communications between Bradley's Luxembourg headquarters and 1st Army are severed, while Montgomery's headquarters can coordinate northern forces effectively. But the optics are catastrophic. An American general losing command of American armies to a British general during the largest American battle of the war. Bradley considers resigning. He tells Eisenhower the decision will be seen as lack of confidence in American leadership, will fuel British criticism of American competence, will undermine Allied unity. Eisenhower is sympathetic but immovable. The decision stands. Bradley accepts it because refusing means abandoning his troops during crisis. But the resentment toward Montgomery, toward Eisenhower, toward the circumstance that put him in his position never fully disappears. The defense of Bastogne becomes the iconic American stand of the Bulge, and demonstrates both the heroism of surrounded troops and the cost of being surrounded. The 101st Airborne Division, rushed to Bastogne from rest positions, arrives just before German forces encircle the town. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe commands the defense, 18,000 men, with limited ammunition, no supply line, and orders to hold at all costs. German forces surround Bastogne on December 21st and demand surrender. McAuliffe's reply, "Nuts," becomes famous, though the actual message is considerably more profane. The 101st holds for 8 days, supplied only by parachute drops when weather permits. Casualties mount daily. By Christmas, the aid station's overwhelmed with 1,500 wounded. Ammunition is nearly exhausted, and German attacks are increasing. The defenders hold because they have no choice. Surrender means captivity, and the Malmedy massacre demonstrated what captivity might mean. They hold until Patton's relief column arrives on December 26. Patton's counterattack demonstrates both his operational brilliance and the price American troops pay for that brilliance. Third Army disengages from offensive operations along the Saar River, moves 133,000 troops and 11,000 vehicles 100 miles north in 72 hours during a snowstorm, and attacks the German southern flank on December 22. The movement is the greatest military maneuver of the war, pivoting an entire army 90 degrees in 3 days while maintaining combat readiness. But the attack itself is brutal. Patton's forces advance through snow and German defensive positions, fighting for every mile. The 4th Armored Division reaches Bastogne on December 26, after 4 days of continuous combat, creating a narrow corridor into the town. The corridor remains under German artillery fire for weeks. Supplying Bastogne becomes a daily exercise in calculated risk convoys, running a gauntlet where any vehicle might be destroyed by shell fire. January 3, 1945. The last German offensive thrust, a desperate attack toward Bastogne designed to cut the relief corridor, fails completely. German forces, exhausted and undersupplied, lack the strength to achieve anything. The Wehrmacht has shot its bolt. From here forward, the Bulge becomes reduction, American and British forces grinding down German salients, pushing the front line back to its December 16 positions. The fighting is methodical and costly. German forces retreat grudgingly, contesting every village, counter-attacking when Americans overextend. 1st Army and 3rd Army link up on January 16, eliminating the Bulge. By January 28, the front returns approximately to pre-battle positions. The Great German Gamble has failed completely, but the cost is staggering: 89,000 American casualties, the bloodiest battle in American history. January 17, 1945, 1100 hours. Montgomery gives a press conference that nearly destroys the Allied coalition. He describes the Bulge as primarily a British victory, suggesting British intervention saved American forces from disaster. His comments technically accurate. in that British forces did assume command of American armies, are interpreted as dismissive of American sacrifice. Bradley reads the transcript and nearly resigns on the spot. Eisenhower intervenes, forcing Montgomery to issue clarifications and preventing Bradley's resignation. But the damage is done. British and American commanders who cooperated through 2 years of coalition warfare now barely speak. The rift will persist through the end of the war, poisoning every operational decision with questions about national prestige and credit. Bradley's command is restored on January 17th, 1st and 9th Armies returning to 12th Army Group control, but the humiliation of losing them, even temporarily, will influence his decision-making for the rest of the war. The final accounting of the Bulge reveals both the battle's horror and its strategic impact. 89,000 American casualties, 19,000 killed, 47,000 wounded, 23,000 captured. German losses, 120,000 total casualties, including 60,000 killed. 600 German tanks destroyed, irreplaceable losses. Germany's last strategic reserves expended, achieving nothing. The Bulge delays Allied offensives by 6 weeks and creates psychological scars that last lifetimes. But strategically, it's a German catastrophe disguised as an American crisis. Germany gambled its last reserves and lost. The Wehrmacht can still fight defensively but can no longer mass forces for offensive operations. The road to Berlin is open, not easy, but open. Bradley spent December wondering if the war was lost. He enters February knowing it's won, just a matter of time and corpses. The question is how many more corpses victory requires. December 22nd, 1944, 0 to 300 hours. In a frozen Belgian field, Patton's Third Army begins the most audacious military maneuver of the war, a 90-degree pivot of 133,000 troops during a snowstorm. Tank crews work by flashlight, mechanics perform maintenance with fingers so numb they can barely grip tools. Infantry divisions load onto trucks designed to carry half their number. Men packed so tightly they can't sit. The entire army must move 100 miles north from the Saar River to the Ardennes, maintain combat readiness during the movement, and attack a prepared German position within 72 hours. Military doctrine says it's impossible. Patton has already written the movement orders. His staff officers worked through the night of December 18th, drafting plans for a contingency Patton insisted would happen. Now it's happening, and Third Army is moving north through darkness and snow, while Bradley watches from Luxembourg, simultaneously awed and terrified by what Patton is attempting. The columns moving north stretch for miles, tanks, trucks, artillery, ambulances, all grinding through snow on roads meant for local traffic. MPs stand at every intersection, directing traffic, because one wrong turn could delay an entire division. Vehicles that break down are pushed off the road and abandoned, no time for recovery. Soldiers who fall asleep and tumble from trucks are left behind to catch up later. The movement continues through Christmas Eve, through Christmas Day, pausing only when vehicles literally can't move because drivers have been awake for 48 hours and are hallucinating. By December 26th, 3 divisions of 3rd Army, 4th Armored, 26th Infantry, and 80th Infantry are positioned south of Bastogne, ready to attack. The movement has cost 0 combat casualties and demonstrated that American mobility, when properly led, can achieve what European armies consider impossible. But the attack itself will demonstrate that mobility without firepower just gets you killed faster. December 26th, 1944, 0 to 600 hours. 4th Armored Division attacks north toward Bastogne through the village of Eisenhower. The attack runs immediately into German defensive positions, anti-tank guns, dug-in infantry, minefields that channel armor into killing zones. The advance becomes house to house, fighting in villages nobody's heard of, gaining ground measured in hundreds of yards at posts measured in dozens of tanks. By noon, 4th Armored has advanced 3 miles and lost 27 Sherman tanks. The corridor to Bastogne is forming, but it's narrow, contested, and under constant German artillery fire. At 1600 hours, elements of 4th Armored reach the 101st Airborne perimeter. Bastogne is relieved. Newsreel cameras capture the moment for American audiences, tanks and paratroopers embracing the triumph of American persistence. What cameras don't show? The corridor is barely 1 mile wide. Germans hold the high ground on both sides, and every vehicle using the corridor risks destruction. The 101st Airborne emerges from Bastogne transformed by the siege. They entered as an elite unit, confident and well-equipped. They emerge as something harder, men who've fought surrounded for 8 days, who've watched friends die from wounds that would have been treatable with proper medical facilities, who've shared the last rations and last ammunition with strangers. The division suffered 2,000 casualties during the siege, killed, wounded, or frozen feet requiring evacuation. The survivors don't speak much about what happened inside the perimeter. They don't have to. Their faces tell the story: hollowed eyes, 1,000-yard stares, the look of men who survived something that should have killed them. Bradley visits Bastogne on December 27th and walks through the aid station, seeing wounded men wrapped in parachute silk because there aren't enough blankets. He approves immediate decoration of the entire division with a Presidential Unit citation. It's inadequate recognition for what they endured, but it's all he can offer. January 3rd, 1945. The last German offensive operation of the Bulge, Operation Nordwind, attacking south from Bastogne toward the relief corridor, achieves nothing, and costs Germany forces it can't replace. German infantry attack through snow against prepared American positions. American artillery, now fully supplied after the crisis shortages of late December, delivers devastating defensive fires. German attacks break out before reaching American lines. By nightfall, the offensive has failed completely, and German commanders know the initiative has passed permanently. From January 3rd forward, the battle becomes American, grinding down German salients, pushing the front lines back toward their December 16th positions. The fighting is methodical, unglamorous, and expensive. Every village becomes a small battle. Every crossroads requires artillery preparation. Progress averages 1 mile per day, and each mile costs 150 casualties. The weather, during early January, makes combat almost unbearable. Temperatures drop below 0 Fahrenheit. Snow accumulates in drifts that stop vehicles. Soldiers develop frostbite in minutes without proper gear, and proper gear doesn't exist in sufficient quantities. First Army reports 3,000 non-combat casualties per week from cold-related injuries, frostbite, trench foot, hypothermia. Men sleep in foxholes filling with snow, unable to dig deeper because the ground is frozen solid. They urinate on their rifle bolts to thaw them before combat. They stuff newspapers inside their uniforms for insulation. Supply officers calculate that keeping First Army supplied with winter clothing requires diverting cargo space from ammunition, creating an impossible choice: freeze or run out of bullets. Bradley allocates space for clothing. Some units still freeze because deliveries can't keep pace with casualties. January 16th, 1945. 1300 hours. First Army and Third Army link up at Hofelize, Belgium, eliminating the German salient and restoring the front line. The link-up is symbolic, rather than operationally significant. German forces are already retreating, the Bulge already collapsing, but Bradley uses it to mark the transition from crisis to counteroffensive. 12th Army Group has absorbed the largest German offensive of the war, and emerged, bloodied but functional. The cost is visible in casualty reports. Bradley reviews that evening: 89,000 Americans killed, wounded, or captured since December 16th. First Army alone lost 41,000 men. Third Army lost 24,000 in relief operations. The British, holding the northern shoulder, lost 1,500. German losses are higher, 120,000 casualties, including 60,000 killed, but American families don't care about German casualties. They care about telegrams that arrive in January explaining their sons died in Belgium in a battle that newspapers say was won. The ammunition expenditure during the Bulge staggers even Bradley, who thought he understood modern warfare's consumption rates. From December 16th through January 28th, American forces fire 17 million artillery shells, more than the entire United States Army possessed in 1940. Small arms ammunition consumption 500 million rounds. Tank gun rounds 90,000. Mortar rounds 2 million. The expenditure rate at peak fighting reaches 2 million rounds per day, a number so large it's almost meaningless until translated into logistics. 2 million rounds weigh 15,000 tons, require 300 cargo ships to transport from America, and need 1,000 trucks to deliver from ports to front lines. American industrial capacity can sustain this consumption indefinitely. German industry can't match it for a single day. The Bulge becomes an artillery duel where one side has unlimited ammunition and the other rations every shell. The outcome is foreordained. Germany just hasn't admitted it yet. The German losses in the Bulge represent irreplaceable assets thrown away for temporary gains. 600 tanks destroyed Germany's entire strategic reserve of armor. 1,400 aircraft lost, including irreplaceable, experienced pilots. 120,000 casualties, including veterans from the Eastern Front. The best trained soldiers Germany has left. The offensive was supposed to split the Allied coalition, capture Antwerp, and force negotiated peace. It achieved none of those objectives. Instead, it accelerated Germany's collapse by expending resources that might have prolonged defensive operations by months. Hitler gambled the last reserves on achieving a decisive victory and lost everything. German commanders know this by early January. Some begin planning how to surrender to Americans rather than Russians. Others commit to fighting until ammunition runs out, then surrendering. A few, the SS diehards, commit to fighting until killed. But none believe Germany can still win. The bulge didn't just fail, it revealed that Germany is functionally defeated. Just too stubborn or terrified to admit it. February 1st, 1945. Bradley's headquarters moves to Namur, Belgium, closer to the Rhine, positioned for the spring offensives that will end the war. He reviews the January casualty figures one final time before filing them. 1st Army, 18,000 casualties. 3rd Army, 12,000. 9th Army, 9,000. Total 39,000 casualties in January alone. Most of them reducing the bulge salient that shouldn't have existed if intelligence had worked correctly. Bradley signs the casualty reports and thinks about alternative histories. What if intelligence had detected the build-up? What if he'd reinforced the Ardennes instead of dismissing it as a quiet sector? How many of those 39,000 would still be alive? The questions are unanswerable and unavoidable. Command means living with decisions and their consequences. The bulge was the consequence of assuming Germans were finished when actually they had one more offensive left. The assumption cost 89,000 American casualties. Bradley will carry that number for the rest of his life. The strategic impact of the bulge extends far beyond casualty figures. The offensive delayed Allied operations by 6 weeks, the time needed to reduce the salient and rebuild forces. The spring offensive into Germany, planned for early February, won't begin until March. Those 6 weeks give Germans time to strengthen Rhine defenses, evacuate equipment from the Ruhr industrial region, and prepare for siege warfare. The delay probably extends the war by a month, possibly 2. Every month means another 50,000 casualties, another 100,000 German civilians killed in strategic bombing, another 100,000 concentration camp victims murdered. The butterfly effect of Hitler's gamble is incalculable. He delayed Germany's defeat by weeks and increased the war's total death toll by hundreds of thousands. Bradley understands this arithmetic and finds no comfort in it. The bulge was won. Victory cost more than defeat would have. And the only consolation is that Germany's defeat will now come faster, because Hitler expended his last reserves, achieving nothing. Cold comfort for families who received telegrams in February. No comfort at all for the men who died in Belgian snow, wondering why the army didn't see the attack coming. March 7th, 1945, 1600 hours, a 19-year-old second lieutenant named Karl Timmermann leads Company A, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, across the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, Germany, and changes history. The bridge, 1,000-foot railroad span across the Rhine, is supposed to be demolished, wired with 500 kilograms of explosives that should have dropped it into the river hours ago. German engineers tried to blow it twice. First demolition, partial explosion that weakened but didn't collapse the structure. Second demolition, failure caused by American artillery, cutting the detonation wires. Now the bridge stands damaged, swaying, but intact, and Timmermann's company is running across it under machine gun fire while German engineers frantically work to blow it manually. At 16:20 hours, an explosion rocks the bridge. Timmermann keeps moving. The bridge holds. By 1700 hours, 120 American soldiers are across the Rhine, establishing the first Allied bridgehead on German soil. Bradley receives word at 1800 hours and makes the fastest decision of his career. Commit everything. Send every available unit to Remagen. Expand the bridgehead and dare the Germans to stop us. Bradley's decision to exploit Remagen immediately before informing Eisenhower, before coordinating with other armies, before confirming the bridge is stable, is the most audacious moment of his career. For 2 years, he's been the careful general, the methodical planner, the man who measures risks and minimizes casualties. Remagen turns him into a riverboat gambler. He commits the entire 9th Armored Division to crossing before the bridge collapses. He diverts 1st Army reinforcements meant for operations elsewhere. He orders engineers to begin building additional bridges immediately, because the Ludendorff Bridge won't survive, it's structurally unsound. overloaded, and under constant German artillery fire. When Eisenhower learns about Bradley's commitments, at 1900 hours, he's presented with a fait accompli. 5,000 Americans are across the Rhine. The bridgehead is expanding, and pulling back is impossible, without abandoning them. Eisenhower approves, retroactively. Bradley has just demonstrated that even careful men gamble when the opportunity is perfect. The German response to Remagen reveals an army on the edge of collapse. Hitler fires Field Marshal von Rundstedt for failing to destroy the bridge and orders the immediate execution of 5 officers responsible for the demolition failure. 3 are shot, 2 escape. He demands fanatical efforts to destroy the bridge. Artillery bombardment, V-2 rocket strikes, Luftwaffe attacks with experimental jet fighters, even frogman sabotage attempts, all fail. American anti-aircraft defenses shoot down most aircraft before they reach the bridge. V-2 rockets miss their strategic weapons, too inaccurate for tactical targets. Frogmen place demolition charges that damage but don't destroy, supporting pontoon bridges. The Ludendorff Bridge itself stands for 10 more days, allowing 30,000 American troops and 2,000 vehicles to cross, before it finally collapses on March 17th. By then, First Army has built 6 pontoon bridges, and the bridgehead extends 25 miles along the Rhine's east bank. Remagen is secure, and Bradley has his gateway into Germany. March 22nd, 1945, 2200 hours. While Bradley's forces consolidate the Remagen bridgehead, George Patton stages the crossing he's dreamed about since France, a surprise Rhine assault without air support, without elaborate preparation, without any of the showmanship that Montgomery is planning for the next day. Third Army's 5th Infantry Division crosses the Rhine at Oppenheim, south of Mainz, using assault boats in darkness. German resistance is minimal. The division loses 28 killed in the entire operation. By dawn March 23rd, 3 regiments are across and expanding the bridgehead. Patton waits until the crossing is secure, then calls Bradley to deliver his message in typical Patton style. "Brad, don't tell anyone, but I'm across." Bradley asks about casualties. Patton replies that he's lost fewer men crossing the Rhine than he lost in training accidents last month. Then comes the Patton flourish. Without benefit of aerial bombing, ground smoke, artillery preparation, or airborne assistance. It's a dig at Montgomery, whose elaborate crossing is launching in 6 hours. Bradley laughs despite himself. Patton has just pulled off the war's most impudent success. March 23rd, 1945, 2100 hours. Montgomery's Operation Plunder launches the largest river crossing since D-Day, orchestrated with British precision and overwhelming force. 1,200 artillery pieces fire for 2 hours before the assault. 80,000 troops cross in the first wave. 30,000 paratroopers drop on the east bank to secure objectives. Churchill watches from an observation post, and correspondents file stories about the greatest river crossing in military history. The operation succeeds completely, establishing a bridgehead 25 miles wide and 10 miles deep within 48 hours. Casualties are relatively light, 3,000 Commonwealth troops killed and wounded. Montgomery declares the crossing proof of proper planning and preparation. Bradley reads the reports and notes that Montgomery's careful crossing cost 90 times more casualties than Patton's improvised assault. The comparison is unfair. Montgomery faced stronger opposition, crossed at a more obvious location, and supported broader strategic objectives, but Bradley notes it anyway. The 3 Rhine crossings, Remagen's lucky capture, Patton's improvised assault, Montgomery's set-piece operation represent 3 distinct philosophies of warfare. Remagen demonstrates the value of exploiting unexpected opportunities, even if it means gambling on structural engineering and overloading a damaged bridge. Patton's crossing demonstrates that surprise and speed can achieve results that elaborate planning can't. Montgomery's crossing demonstrates that proper preparation with overwhelming force produces predictable success at acceptable cost. Bradley, watching all 3 unfold simultaneously, realizes they're all correct. Modern warfare requires all 3 approaches: opportunistic exploitation, audacious surprise, and methodical overwhelming force. His command style leans toward the third, methodical and overwhelming, but he's learning to appreciate the first 2 when circumstances allow them. The question is whether he learned this early enough. If he'd been more opportunistic in August, more willing to gamble on Patton's eastward thrust instead of the Brittany ports, would the war already be over? By March 25th, Bradley's 12th Army Group holds 3 major Rhine bridgeheads and is pouring troops into Germany faster than German forces can respond. 1st Army at Remagen has expanded to 35 miles wide. 3rd Army at Oppenheim has captured Frankfurt and is driving toward Kassel. 9th Army, supporting Montgomery's northern crossing, is advancing toward the Ruhr industrial region. The Rhine, Germany's greatest natural defensive barrier, has been breached in 3 places simultaneously. German defenses, already fragile, are collapsing. Wehrmacht units that fought stubbornly in the Bulge and the Siegfried Line are surrendering in regiment-sized groups. The prisoner totals climbing daily: 10,000 on March 24th, 15,000 on March 25th, 20,000 on March 26th. Bradley reviews intelligence reports suggesting total German collapse is imminent, and feels something he hasn't felt since before the Bulge. Optimism. Not the naive optimism of August 1944, when logistics strangled the advance. Realistic optimism based on evidence that German resistance is breaking and the end is visible. March 26, 1945. Eisenhower visits Bradley's headquarters to discuss strategy for the final phase of the war. The question is simple and monumentally significant. What do we do now? Options include: drive north to link up with Soviet forces advancing west, capturing Berlin before Russians reach it; drive east into central Germany, splitting the country and preventing Nazi resistance in an Alpine redoubt; or stop at agreed occupation zones and let Russians pay the cost of capturing Berlin. Eisenhower presents his decision. American forces will drive east toward Leipzig and Dresden, linking up with Soviets somewhere in central Germany. British forces will secure northern Germany and Denmark. Berlin will be left to the Soviets. It's in their occupation zone per Yalta Conference agreements, and Eisenhower estimates capturing it would cost 100,000 Allied casualties. Bradley agrees. Berlin is a political objective, not a military one. Better to accept the Yalta agreements and end the war quickly than fight for a city they'll have to hand over anyway. The decision is pragmatic, strategic, and will be debated for the next 80 years as either wise realism or catastrophic failure to constrain Soviet expansion. The Rhine crossings mark the end of one kind of war and the beginning of another. From June 1944 through March 1945, Bradley commanded armies fighting a peer enemy, German forces with comparable equipment, superior tactical training, and defensive advantages. Every gain was contested. Every victory was expensive. Now, in late March 1945, Bradley commands armies fighting a collapsing enemy German forces with shattered morale, inadequate supplies, and no strategic reserves. The transformation happens almost overnight. Units that fought building to building in Ardennes are now advancing 20 miles per day through towns that surrender without firing a shot. The war hasn't ended, but its character has fundamentally changed. What remains is pursuit, occupation, and the grim task of discovering what Nazi Germany was actually doing to its victims, while Wehrmacht forces held the attention of Allied armies. Bradley's forces are about to become liberators, witnesses, and prosecutors. The killing war is almost over. The reckoning is just beginning. April 1st, 1945, 1300 hours. Near Lippstadt, Germany, patrols from 1st Army and 9th Army meet, closing the Ruhr pocket, the largest encirclement in Western Front history. Trapped inside, 325,000 German troops, 25 divisions, including Field Marshal Walter Model's Army Group B. The pocket is 60 miles across, contains Germany's industrial heartland, and represents approximately 1/3 of all German forces facing Western allies. Model knows he's trapped and knows surrender is inevitable. But he also knows Hitler's orders. Fight to the last man, no surrender, death before dishonor. The soldiers trapped with him know something simpler. The war is lost, and dying for Hitler makes no sense. Over the next 18 days, the Ruhr pocket will demonstrate the final disintegration of German military discipline, not through cowardice, but through rational calculation, that continuing to fight achieves nothing except additional corpses. Bradley's plan for reducing the Ruhr is methodically brutal: surround it completely, cut it into smaller segments, and destroy each segment systematically. 1st Army attacks from the south, 9th Army from the north and east. Artillery pounds German positions, but there's no hurry, the pocket isn't going anywhere, and every day of siege means more Germans who decide surrender is preferable to dying for a lost cause. The advance inside the pocket is strange and surreal. Some German units fight fanatically, defending positions until overrun. Others surrender at first contact. Some Wehrmacht soldiers approach American lines under white flags, asking for terms. Others simply desert, changing into civilian clothes and melting into the population. The collapse is uneven, unpredictable, and revealing. The Wehrmacht, supposedly the most disciplined army in the world, is fragmenting under the weight of inevitable defeat. April 11th, 1945. 4th Armored Division, Patton spearhead unit that relieved Bastogne, liberates order of concentration camp in central Germany. The soldiers expect a PAW camp or forced labor facility. What they find defies comprehension. Corpses stacked like cordwood. Emaciated survivors who barely look human. Barracks filled with people too weak to stand, dying of typhus and starvation. An SS guard shot while trying to flee, killed by American soldiers who stopped taking prisoners after seeing what the guards had done. The division commander calls Bradley. "You need to see this," he says. Bradley needs to see what we've been fighting for. Bradley arrives April 12 with Eisenhower and Patton. They tour the camp in silence. Patton vomits. Eisenhower's face becomes a mask. Bradley takes photographs. He wants evidence, wants documentation that can't be denied or forgotten. Then he orders military government officers to bring German civilians from nearby towns to tour the camp. "You will see this," he orders. "You will understand what you supported." The liberation of concentration camps becomes the moral justification for everything that came before. Every casualty, every controversial decision, every strategic compromise, all of it validated by Ohrdruf, Buchenwald, Nordhausen, Dachau. Bradley tours 4 camps in 2 weeks and emerges transformed. He spent 11 months managing casualty ratios, calculating acceptable losses, balancing strategic objectives against human costs. The camps render those calculations irrelevant. This is what we were stopping, he realizes. This is why every casualty was necessary. The mathematics of war, so cold, so brutal, suddenly make moral sense. The soldiers who died on Omaha Beach died to end this. The divisions ground up in the Hoken Forest fought to stop this. The 89,000 casualties at the Bulge prevented more time for this. Bradley has carried enormous guilt about the men who died under his command. The camps don't erase that guilt, nothing could, but they provide context that makes the guilt bearable. April 12, 1945, 1700 hours. Franklin Roosevelt dies in Warm Springs, Georgia. The news reaches Bradley's headquarters at 1900 hours, European time. The war stops for nothing, but Bradley stops anyway, sitting in his office, processing the death of the commander-in-chief he served but barely knew. Roosevelt has been president for 12 years, guided America through depression and war, and now won't see the victory he made possible. Harry Truman becomes president, a man Bradley doesn't know, a former senator with no foreign policy experience, suddenly commanding the largest military in American history. The transition is jarring and destabilizing. Roosevelt understood coalition warfare, understood the political compromises necessary to maintain the alliance. Does Truman, will he support Eisenhower's decision to let Soviets take Berlin? Or will political pressure force strategic decisions Bradley considers militarily unsound? The questions are unanswerable on April 12th, but they'll be answered within weeks, and the answers will define the post-war world. April 15th, 1945, 0 to 900 hours. 9th Army reaches the Elbe River at Magdeburg, 50 miles from Berlin. The advance has been spectacular. 200 miles in 2 weeks, capturing intact bridges, overrunning German resistance before it can organize. The soldiers can see the end. Berlin is visible in clear weather, close enough that some units send patrols across the Elbe just to say they did, but orders from Eisenhower are clear: stop at the Elbe, consolidate positions, and wait for Soviet forces advancing from the east. No attempt to capture Berlin, no race to beat the Russians. The orders devastate morale. Soldiers who fought from Normandy to central Germany in 11 months now sit 50 miles from Hitler's capital and watch someone else finish the war. Some understand the strategic logic. Berlin will cost 100,000 casualties and end up in Soviet occupation zone anyway. Others feel cheated. We did the work, now someone else gets the glory. The decision to halt at the Elbe, not drive for Berlin, represents Bradley's final evolution as a strategic thinker. In Tunisia, he thought tactically, how do I take this hill? In Normandy, he thought operationally, how do I break out of the bocage? By April 1945, he thinks strategically and politically, what happens after the war? Berlin is a political objective that will go to Soviet occupation regardless of who captures it. Fighting for Berlin means American casualties. Purchasing a political objective America won't keep. Bradley supports Eisenhower's decision completely. Let the Russians pay the blood price for Berlin. American forces will secure objectives that matter post-war. The Elbe line, the Alpine region preventing Nazi redoubt, and central Germany's industrial capacity. It's cold calculation that prioritizes American lives over political symbolism. Critics will argue Bradley missed the chance to constrain Soviet expansion. Bradley will argue that constraining Soviet expansion wasn't worth 100,000 American casualties for a city America would have to abandon anyway. April 18, 1945. Field Marshal Model, trapped in the Ruhr pocket with no possibility of escape, shoots himself rather than surrender. His suicide note explains that a field marshal cannot be taken prisoner. It's the last gesture of Wehrmacht honor culture: better death than captivity, better suicide than surrender. Model's death changes nothing tactically. The Ruhr pocket has already collapsed. 325,000 prisoners in American hands, the largest mass surrender in German history. But Model's suicide symbolizes the end of something. The Wehrmacht's self-image as an honorable institution, separate from Nazi atrocities. That fiction dies in the Ruhr, where soldiers surrender in division-sized groups while their commander shoots himself. Bradley reads the report of Model's death and feels nothing, no triumph, no sympathy, just exhaustion with the cult of military honor that requires men to die rather than admit defeat. April 25, 1945, 1300 hours. Patrols from 1st Army's 69th Infantry Division meet Soviet forces from the 5th Guards Army at Torgau on the Elbe River. The meeting is chaotic, emotional, and carefully photographed for propaganda purposes. American and Soviet soldiers embrace, exchange insignia, drink toasts. The photographers capture images of smiling allies united against fascism. What cameras don't capture? The American soldiers shock at Soviet equipment. Their trucks are basic, their uniforms crude, their weapons functional but unsophisticated. What cameras don't capture? The Soviet soldiers shock at American abundance: cigarettes, chocolate, food in quantities they've never seen. What cameras absolutely don't capture? Both sides wondering if they'll be fighting each other next. The alliance is fracturing even as photographers document its triumph. Bradley watches the Torgau footage and thinks about Berlin, about the decision not to race the Soviets, about whether letting them take it was wisdom or weakness. History will decide. He just wants the killing to stop. By the end of April, Bradley's 12th Army Group controls territory from the Rhine to the Elbe, from Austria to the Baltic approaches. 1,300,000 troops occupy an area the size of France. The advance has been so rapid that military government can't keep pace. Towns captured days ago still have no Allied administration, no food distribution, no medical services. The infrastructure of occupation doesn't exist yet, and Bradley's combat forces must improvise. Infantry divisions become military police, tank crews become traffic controllers, artillery units become supply distributors. The transformation from combat army to occupation force happens in weeks, and nobody trained for it. But the alternative, leaving German civilians to starve, or German displaced persons to fend for themselves, is unacceptable. So Bradley's soldiers improvise, creating occupation government from scratch, while still fighting scattered Wehrmacht units that haven't received surrender orders. May 7th, 1945, 0241 hours. In a red brick schoolhouse in Reims, France, German Colonel General Alfred Jodl signs unconditional surrender documents, ending the war in Europe. Eisenhower is present but doesn't witness the signing, considers it beneath his dignity to attend until after unconditional surrender is complete. Bradley is at 12th Army Group headquarters in Wiesbaden, Germany, 75 miles from Reims, receiving reports via telephone. When the surrender is confirmed, he returns to his office and closes the door. His aide later reports that Bradley sat alone for 30 minutes, saying nothing, doing nothing visible, just sitting, processing the end of what consumed his last 2 years. When he emerges, he issues orders for ceasefire at 0 to 800 hours, May 8th, then returns to reviewing casualty reports. 586,000 American casualties in 1st Army, 3rd Army, 9th Army, and 15th Army under his command. The number of statistics, until he thinks about the letters: 586,000 letters to families, 500,000 telegrams, a generation damaged beyond repair. VE Day Victory in Europe Day, May 8th, 1945. unfolds with celebrations across America and Europe while Bradley works. His headquarters issues 0 celebratory statements, holds 0 victory parades, authorizes 0 early releases. The war in Europe is over. The occupation is beginning. An occupation requires more troops, more organization, more discipline than combat did. Bradley spends May 8th coordinating with military government officers about food distribution in occupied Germany, arranging repatriation for displaced persons, and establishing protocols for war crimes investigations. His statement on VE Day is characteristically understated. We have won the war, but have not yet won the peace. The sentiment irritates. Some soldiers want to celebrate, want recognition for what they accomplished. But Bradley's statement reflects reality. Victory created as many problems as it solved. Now comes the hard part. Figuring out what to do with 70 million conquered Germans, 11 million displaced persons, and a continent in ruins. May 10, 1945. Bradley tours devastated Germany and confronts the scale of destruction Allied bombing and ground combat produced. Cities of rubble, 70% destroyed, 80% destroyed, 90% destroyed. Civilians emerge from shelters to find homes gone, infrastructure gone, employment gone, water systems don't function, electrical grids are destroyed. Food distribution has collapsed. Approximately 11 million refugees and displaced persons are moving across Germany. Concentration camp survivors, freed slave laborers, ethnic Germans fleeing Soviet zones, POWs trying to reach home. The humanitarian crisis is staggering and immediate. Military government estimates Germany needs 50,000 tons of food per day to prevent famine. Current delivery capacity, 5,000 tons per day. The shortfall means people will starve unless the situation improves. Bradley approves emergency food shipments from military stocks, knowing he's feeding former enemies while American families still face food rationing. The decision is pragmatic rather than compassionate. Starving Germans means disease, means unrest, means occupation, becomes impossible. June 10, 1945. Bradley receives orders from Washington that shock him more than anything since Pearl Harbor. He's being reassigned from 12th Army Group to become Administrator of Veterans Affairs, not Chief of Staff, not Theater Commander. Administrator of Veterans Affairs, a civilian agency handling benefits for discharged soldiers. Bradley's reaction to the assignment is captured by an aide. He looked like someone punched him in the stomach. This is not how his war was supposed to end. Eisenhower is Supreme Commander, will probably become Chief of Staff. Patton commands 3rd Army, will probably retire with full honors. Bradley, who commanded more troops than any American general in history, is being sent home to manage paperwork and disability claims. The assignment is politically brilliant. Veterans need advocacy, and Bradley's reputation as the soldier's general makes him perfect for the role. But it's also exile, removing Bradley from military operations just when post-war military structure is being determined. The Veterans Affairs assignment reveals Truman administration priorities and Bradley's lack of political power. Marshall is Army Chief of Staff with direct access to Truman. Eisenhower is the war hero with political prospects. Bradley is the competent general who never made headlines, never cultivated political connections, never positioned himself for post-war influence. So he gets Veterans Affairs, important work, necessary work, but not power. Bradley accepts because refusing means early retirement, and he's not ready to retire. He's 52 years old, physically healthy, intellectually engaged. He wants to continue serving. Veterans Affairs is serving, just not the kind of service he imagined. He has 3 weeks to close out 12th Army Group Command, brief his replacement, and return to Washington. 3 weeks to end the chapter of his life that defined him, then back to America, to bureaucracy, to managing the wreckage of the war he helped win. August 15, 1945. 1900 hours. Bradley, now in Washington as VA administrator, learns that Japan has surrendered. The entire global war is finally over. American deaths in World War II, 405,000. Deaths under Bradley's direct command in Europe, approximately 65,000 killed from June 1944 through May 1945. The numbers are lower than feared, higher than hoped. Bradley's casualty ratio killed per 100,000 troops commanded is approximately 5%, among the lowest of major Western Front commanders, lower than Patton's 6%, lower than Montgomery's 7%. But ratios are abstractions. 65,000 killed means 65,000 families destroyed, means 65,000 mothers who'll never see their sons again, means widows, orphans, permanent vacancies at dinner tables. Bradley thinks about those families constantly, and finds no comfort in favorable casualty ratios. November 1945. Bradley assumes full command of Veterans Affairs and inherits a bureaucratic disaster. 4 million veterans claims are backlogged. Hospitals are overcrowded, 67,000 patients. Capacity for 50,000. Benefits payments are delayed by months. Disability determinations are inconsistent. Fraud is rampant. Fake claims, false medical reports, corrupt administrators. The VA budget is $11.6 billion larger than most countries' entire budgets, but the money is being wasted through incompetence and corruption. Bradley approaches the VA the way he approached 12th Army Group. Identify problems, fix them systematically, fire people who can't adapt. He fires corrupt administrators, streamlines claims processing, expands hospital capacity, and personally reviews policy on disputed claims. The work is unglamorous and administratively tedious. It's also some of the most important work of his career. Veterans Affairs will affect 10 million lives more than Bradley commanded in combat. Get it right, and millions of veterans reintegrate successfully. Get it wrong, and America faces social crisis. The transition from combat commander to bureaucratic administrator is difficult and depressing. Bradley spends his days reviewing budget proposals and meeting with congressional committees instead of planning operations. He reads reports about hospital bed shortages instead of casualty reports. He testifies about veterans' benefits instead of commanding armies. The work matters. Veterans need advocacy, and Bradley provides it effectively. But it's not what he trained for, not what he wanted, not how he imagined his career would continue. He's a soldier running a civilian agency, using military discipline to fix civilian problems. It works, mostly. VA claims backlog drops from 4 million to 1 million within 18 months. Hospital capacity expands to 75,000 beds. Benefits payments become regular and reliable. Bradley transforms VA from disaster to functional bureaucracy, but he does it while watching Eisenhower plan post-war military structure and Patton prepare for retirement with 4 honors. Bradley is doing important work in obscurity. Again, always. December 1945. Bradley reviews the year's events from his VA office. Fighting in the Bulge. February, crossing the Rhine. Liberating concentration camps. Victory. Japan surrender. November, managing veterans' benefits. The year began with him commanding 1,300,000 troops in combat. It ends with him managing hospital budgets. The transformation is dizzying and vaguely insulting, but Bradley doesn't complain publicly, doesn't seek sympathy, doesn't maneuver for different assignment. He does the job he's given because that's what he's always done. Competence without complaint. Service without glory. The quiet professional who makes the system work while others take credit. It's been his role since West Point. It'll be his role until retirement. And somehow, despite the lack of recognition, despite the mundane assignments, despite being overlooked for more glamorous positions, Bradley keeps serving, because that's what soldiers do. They serve, even when service means shuffling papers instead of commanding armies. February 7, 1948. Bradley pins on his 4-star, becoming General of the Army, the first member of West Point's class of 1915 to reach the highest rank in the United States Army. The promotion comes with appointment as Army Chief of Staff, succeeding Eisenhower. Bradley is 54 years old, 33 years after graduating from West Point, and has finally reached the pinnacle of military leadership. The position gives him authority over the post-war army, its size, structure, doctrine, and budget, but it also gives him responsibility for navigating the emerging Cold War, managing demobilization from 12 million troops to fewer than 1 million, and defending military budgets against a Congress that wants peace dividends and tax cuts. Bradley transforms from combat commander to political operator, testifying before Congress, negotiating the State Department, managing alliance politics. The skills required are different from commanding armies but equally demanding. The Cold War transforms American military strategy and Bradley's role in shaping it. The Soviet Union, America's ally against Germany, becomes America's primary adversary within months of victory. Soviet forces occupy Eastern Europe and show no intention of leaving. Communist parties threaten Western European governments. Soviet nuclear weapons development revealed in August 1949 creates existential threat. Bradley helps craft America's response, maintaining occupation forces in Germany and Japan. creating NATO alliance system, developing nuclear strategy, and rebuilding army capabilities degraded by rapid demobilization. The work is strategic rather than tactical, political rather than operational. Bradley adapts because he has no choice. The nature of military leadership has changed. Generals are now diplomats, bureaucrats, and nuclear strategists. Combat command was simpler. August 29, 49. Bradley becomes the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military position in American government, commanding all services and advising the president directly. The position is created specifically for Bradley, recognizing his ability to coordinate competing service interests and translate military requirements into political language. As chairman, Bradley navigates the emerging Cold War, the Korean War, and the most dangerous strategic decision of the early nuclear age, whether to use atomic weapons in Korea. His advice to Truman is consistent. Nuclear weapons are strategic tools for total war against peer enemies, not tactical weapons for limited wars against proxies. Using them in Korea risks World War III with Soviet Union. The advice proves correct, though it frustrates MacArthur and leads to the confrontation that defines Bradley's post-war reputation. April 1951. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding United Nations forces in Korea, publicly advocates for expanding the war into China, using nuclear weapons if necessary, and accepting risk of Soviet intervention. Truman considers MacArthur's position reckless and potentially catastrophic. MacArthur continues advocating for expanded war, despite direct orders to limit public statements. On April 11th, Truman fires MacArthur, the most famous American general, war hero, and presidential aspirant. MacArthur returns to Heroes Welcome, addresses Congress, and campaigns against Truman's limited war strategy. Bradley is asked to testify. His statement to Congress becomes his most famous quote. MacArthur's strategy would involve us in the wrong war, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy. The testimony destroys MacArthur's political credibility and validates Truman's decision. It also establishes Bradley as the voice of military reason against MacArthur's apocalyptic vision. The MacArthur controversy reveals Bradley's evolution from field commander to strategic thinker. In World War II, Bradley commanded armies against existential threat, where total war was appropriate response. In Korea, he understands the war is limited, a proxy conflict where the objective is preventing communist expansion without triggering World War III. Limited objectives require limited means. MacArthur, shaped by World War II's total war mentality, can't accept limitations. Bradley, shaped by seeing what total war costs, embraces limitations as strategic necessity. The difference isn't courage or commitment. It's understanding that not every war requires or justifies total commitment. Bradley spent 11 months in Europe watching hundreds of thousands die. He's seen what total war produces. He's liberated concentration camps and knows what total war was necessary to stop. Korea isn't that. Korea is important but not existential. Bradley's testimony prevents the Korean War from becoming World War III. It's possibly the most important contribution of his career, though less dramatic than commanding armies. October 1951, Bradley's memoir, A Soldier's Story, is published and becomes a immediate bestseller. The book is Bradley's attempt to shape historical interpretation of World War II, defend his decisions, and settle scores with Montgomery. The memoir is candid about command tensions, critical of Montgomery's caution and egotism, and defensive about controversial decisions like Brittany Ports and Falaise Gap. Critics note what the memoir downplays: the Omaha Beach intelligence failure, the decision to continue Hook and Forest operations despite catastrophic casualties, the failure to anticipate the bulge. Bradley's memoir presents the war as he wants it: remembered American competence, triumphing over German expertise through material superiority and sound strategy. It's not entirely accurate but not dishonest either, just selective. Like all memoirs written by participants who want their version to prevail, the final assessment of Bradley's military career requires examining both what he achieved and what it cost. Achievements: commanded largest American field army in history, liberated most of France and Western Germany, defeated Wehrmacht forces that began the war as world's most effective military, 65,000 Americans killed under his command, 586,000 total casualties, decisions that extended the war and cost thousands of lives that better decisions might have saved. Bradley's defenders argue his casualties were lower than other commanders. His decisions were sound given available information. His careful approach saved lives compared to reckless alternatives. Critics argue he was too cautious, missed opportunities to end the war faster, and valued procedural correctness over operational audacity. Both are partially correct. Bradley was cautious by temperament but not paralytically so. He took risks at Remagen and approved Cobra despite friendly fire concerns. But he preferred methodical accumulation of victories over audacious gambles that might end the war spectacularly or catastrophically. The soldier's general title, Bradley's most enduring label, reflects both reality and myth. Reality: Bradley did prioritize reducing casualties, did lie modestly rather than ostentatiously, did listen to subordinates and share credit. He was more approachable than MacArthur, less theatrical than Patton, more humble than Montgomery. Soldiers appreciated his lack of pretension and his visible concern for their welfare. Myth: that Bradley's careful approach cost fewer lives than alternatives would have. Unknown and unknowable. Maybe sending Patton to Brittany instead of east toward Paris extended the war by months and cost tens of thousands of lives. Maybe Hurtgen forest operations killed 33,000 men for no strategic gain. Or maybe Bradley's caution prevented disasters that recklessness would have caused. We can't run the counterfactual. We only know what happened, not what might have happened. April 8, 1981. Omar Nelson Bradley dies at age 88 in New York City. He's the last surviving five-star general, the last direct link to World War II's command decisions, the last man who can answer questions about why things happened the way they did. His funeral at Arlington National Cemetery draws presidents, generals, and thousands of veterans who served under his command. They come to honor the soldier's general, the quiet man who led them through Europe, the officer who cared about casualties even when caring couldn't stop them. The funeral is full military honors. Caisson, riderless horse, 21-gun salute. Bradley is buried wearing the uniform he wore for 46 years, carrying the rank he earned, commanding men in combat, surrounded by soldiers he sent into battle, and who came home because his decisions were careful enough, bold enough, and lucky enough. The final accounting of Bradley's career can't be reduced to statistics or simple judgments. He commanded 1,300,000 troops, the largest American combat force in history. Under his command, American armies liberated France, crossed the Rhine, destroyed German military power in the West, and discovered the full horror of Nazi genocide. The cost was 586,000 casualties, including 65,000 killed. Could better decisions have reduced those casualties? Probably. Could worse decisions have increased them catastrophically? Certainly. Bradley operated between those extremes, not brilliant but never stupid, not audacious but never paralyzed, not beloved but never hated. He was competent, reliable, and effective. In total war against genocidal enemy, competence matters more than brilliance. Bradley was competent enough to win. The price of victory was counted in telegrams to families, in amputees in VA hospitals, in graves at Arlington and Normandy. Bradley carried that price for 36 years after the war ended, carried it through his tenure as Army Chief of Staff and Chairman of Joint Chiefs, carried it until the day he died. History has treated Bradley ambiguously, neither saint nor villain but something in between. He wasn't the greatest American general, that's probably Marshall or Eisenhower. He wasn't the most aggressive, that's Patton. He wasn't the most innovative, that's perhaps MacArthur in the Pacific. Bradley was the most reliable, the general who could be given an impossible task and would accomplish it without drama, without excuses, without disasters. Reliability is an undervalued virtue in military command. The general who never has catastrophic failures, who wins steadily if not spectacularly, who brings his soldiers home alive when possible, that general wins wars. Bradley was that general. He won his war. The cost haunted him. The necessity justified it. And in the end, that's the only accounting that matters. He did what had to be done, at the price that had to be paid. And the victory made the price endurable, if not acceptable. 50 million people died in World War II. Bradley's decisions affected whether that number was 50 million or 55 million. He chose the lower number when he could, sometimes he couldn't. That's command. That's what the soldier's general means. And that's Omar Nelson Bradley's legacy, imperfect, controversial, and absolutely essential to victory.